The Trojan catastrophe and the Golden Apple incident. Hey guys. Tonight we are going to drift back into the ancient fog. The kind of fog filled with gods who have way too much time on their hands, and mortals who really should have known better than to get involved with them. We're going to look at love triangles in Greek mythology. Now usually, when people talk about Greek myths in school, it's all heroes and monsters and lofty themes of fate and glory. But if you actually sit down and read the texts, or the plays that came later, it's mostly just a bunch of very powerful entities behaving incredibly badly in their personal lives. It's less high art and more like a very expensive reality TV show where the contestants can accidentally turn each other into trees or constellations if they get too stressed out. So dim the lights. Get comfortable under the covers. Let your eyes get heavy. We're just going to float through some of the messiest romantic entanglements the ancient world had to offer. There are no quizzes at the end. Just vibes and entirely questionable life choices made by people who lived in very nice marble palaces. We should probably start with the big one. The granddaddy of disastrous love triangles. The one that didn't just ruin a dinner party or cause a nasty divorce, but actually ended an entire civilization. Because of course it did. If you're going to mess up, you might as well go all the way. We're talking, naturally, about Helen of Sparta, Paris of Troy, and poor, boring Menelaus. The ultimate case of, this really isn't going to end well for anybody. To understand why this particular triangle was so destructive, you have to understand that it was doomed before it even started. It was essentially an industrial accident caused by divine boredom. Let's start with Helen. You know her as Helen of Troy, the face that launched 1,000 ships. Which is a lot of pressure to put on anyone's appearance, really. Before she was Helen of Troy, she was Helen of Sparta. She was widely considered the most beautiful woman in the known world. This wasn't just a casual observation, it was practically a geopolitical fact. Her parentage was, in standard Greek fashion, complicated. Her mother was Leda, the queen of Sparta. Her father was technically King Tyndareus. But actually, her father was Zeus, who decided to visit Leda in the form of a swan. Because Zeus has never met a boundary he didn't want to ignore in the weirdest way possible. So, Helen hatches from an egg, yes, really, and grows up to be stunningly beautiful. And because she's the most beautiful princess in Greece, every single eligible bachelor, prince, and king shows up at Sparta to ask for her hand in marriage. It was a logistical nightmare for her stepfather, Tyndareus. He had a palace full of heavily armed, very entitled young men, all hyped up on testosterone and ego, and only one of them could win. He knew that whoever he picked, the other 99 guys would probably start a riot and burn down his city. Enter Odysseus. Before he went off on his 10-year boat trip, he was just a very clever, slightly annoying prince from Ithaca. He saw the problem and offered Tyndareus a solution. He said, "Look, I don't even want Helen. I want her cousin Penelope. You help me with that, and I'll solve your bachelor problem." Tyndareus agreed, because he just wanted these guys out of his house. Odysseus proposed the famous Oath of Tyndareus. Before the decision was made, every single suitor had to swear a sacred oath to defend whoever the chosen husband turned out to be. If anyone tried to steal Helen away, they all had to band together to get her back. The suitors, not being particularly forward-thinking, all agreed. They all thought, well, obviously I'm going to win, so this is just free insurance for me. They didn't win. Tyndareus chose Menelaus. Now, let's talk about Menelaus. If Helen was a 10, Menelaus was a solid, dependable 4. He was the younger brother of Agamemnon, the High King of Mycenae. Agamemnon was ambitious, loud, and generally unpleasant. Menelaus was just there. He was rich, he was noble, and he was perfectly adequate. He was the kind of guy who probably enjoyed organizing his scrolls and going to bed at a reasonable hour. He wasn't the sort of guy you write epics about, at least not until his personal life imploded. So Menelaus gets the girl. They get married. Tyndareus dies, and Menelaus becomes king of Sparta. He and Helen have a daughter, Hermione. Everything seems fine. It's boring, but fine. Menelaus is happy because he has the trophy wife of the century, and Helen is, well, we never really get to hear her side of the story much, but one assumes she was mildly bored by the Spartan quiet life. But while Menelaus was enjoying his quiet domestic existence, things were happening over across the Aegean Sea in Troy that were about to ruin his whole decade. This brings us to the third point of our triangle, Paris. Paris was a prince of Troy, one of the 50 sons of King Priam. But he hadn't grown up in the palace. When he was born, there was a prophecy that he would cause the destruction of the city. Standard operating procedure for ancient royalty when hearing a bad prophecy was to take the baby and leave it on a mountain to die of exposure. Which is what they did to Paris. Naturally, this never works. A shepherd found him, raised him, and he grew up to be incredibly handsome, slightly vain, and not particularly bright. He was just minding his own business, herding sheep on Mount Ida, when 3 goddesses dropped out of the sky and demanded he settle an argument for them. It was Hera, the queen of the gods, Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, and Aphrodite, goddess of love. They had found a golden apple inscribed with the words, "To the fairest." They started fighting over it at a wedding they hadn't even been invited to, which is just rude, and Zeus, wanting absolutely nothing to do with this domestic minefield, told them to ask the shepherd boy Paris. So, you have 3 all-powerful deities standing in front of a teenage shepherd, trying to bribe him for an apple. Hera offered him power. She said she'd make him high king over all of Europe and Asia. Athena offered him wisdom and skill in battle. She'd make him the greatest warrior ever known. Aphrodite, knowing her audience, just smiled and said, "I'll give you the most beautiful woman in the world." Paris didn't even blink. He didn't care about politics, and he didn't want to study warfare. He was a lover, not a fighter. He gave the apple to Aphrodite. This was a massive mistake, obviously. You don't just annoy Hera and Athena and get away with it. But Paris didn't think about that. He just asked Aphrodite, "Okay, so where is she?" Aphrodite checked her celestial Rolodex and said, "Her name is Helen. She lives in Sparta. Oh, slight snag, she's currently married to a guy named Menelaus. But don't worry about it. I'm the goddess of love. I'll handle the details." A little while later, Paris discovers his true heritage, gets accepted back into the royal family of Troy, everyone apparently forgetting the whole "he will destroy the city" prophecy, and decides to go on a diplomatic mission to Sparta. When Paris arrived in Sparta, he looked magnificent. He was decked out in gold-embroidered Trojan silks, perfumed, and just generally glowing with divine favor. Menelaus, being a good host and a bit clueless, welcomed him in. He gave him the best guest room, threw a big feast, and introduced him to his wife, Helen. And this is where it gets murky. According to some versions, Aphrodite sent her son Eros, Cupid, to shoot Helen with an arrow so she'd fall madly in love with Paris instantly. In other versions, she was just really bored with Menelaus and thought the shiny new Trojan prince looked like a fun weekend project. Either way, they hit it off. They hit it off a little too well. And then, Menelaus made a critical error. His grandfather died in Crete, and he had to go to the funeral. He told his wife, "Honey, I have to go handle this family business. You stay here and make sure our guest, Prince Paris, has everything he needs." You can almost hear the collective sigh of history. As soon as Menelaus' ship was over the horizon, Paris and Helen started packing. They didn't just leave, they looted the place. They took a massive amount of Menelaus' treasury, gold, tripods, fancy robes, and then they got on Paris' ship and sailed for Troy. Now, let's just float back to Menelaus for a moment. He comes back from the funeral, probably tired, looking forward to a quiet night in his own bed. He walks into the palace. It's strangely quiet. The treasury door is open. His wife's closet is empty. It probably took him a minute to process it. This wasn't just a wife leaving her husband. This was a massive violation of Xenia, the sacred Greek code of hospitality. You do not sleep with your host's wife and steal his furniture. It's just not done. Menelaus was furious. But more than that, he was embarrassed. His older brother, Agamemnon, had always overshadowed him, and now the whole world was going to know that a pretty boy shepherd from Troy had walked off with his wife and his wallet. So, Menelaus did the only sensible thing. He went to his big brother Agamemnon and said, "We have a problem." Agamemnon, who had been looking for an excuse to attack Troy for years because they controlled vital shipping lanes, tried very hard to hide his smile. He patted Menelaus on the back and said, "Don't worry, little brother. Remember that oath all those guys swore? We're going to call in those favors." And that is how a messy domestic affair between a bored demigoddess, a vain prince, and a dull king turned into a 10-year siege involving thousands of ships and the eventual total annihilation of Troy. All because 3 goddesses couldn't agree on who was prettier, and Menelaus left town for a weekend. It really puts modern relationship drama into perspective. But that's just the most famous one. If we drift a little further back in time, away from the Trojan War, we find other triangles that were just as messy, even if they didn't involve quite as many battleships. Let's shift our focus to something a little more subterranean. Let's talk about the Underworld, because even the land of the dead had relationship issues. The Underworld custody battle and the Argonauts' divorce. So, we've left the sunny, blood-soaked beaches of Troy, and we're drifting down. Down past the roots of the trees, past the bedrock, into the quiet, damp gloom of the Underworld. It's actually quite peaceful down here if you ignore the 3-headed dog. The next triangle isn't strictly a romantic rivalry in the traditional sense. It's more of a tug-of-war. A cosmic custody battle between a husband, a wife, and a mother-in-law who literally controlled the seasons. We are talking about Hades, Persephone, and Demeter. Now, Hades often gets a bad rap in modern movies. He's usually depicted as this screaming, fiery villain with blue hair. But in the actual myths, he wasn't really evil. He was just gloomy. He was the eldest brother of Zeus and Poseidon, but when they drew lots to divide up the universe, he drew the short straw. Zeus got the sky, Poseidon got the ocean, and Hades got the basement. He was essentially the incredibly wealthy, solitary uncle who lives in a dark mansion and never comes to family reunions because he hates making small talk. He was the king of the dead, which meant he was technically the richest god because all the gold and gems in the ground belonged to him. But he was lonely. And because he lived in a cave system filled with ghosts, his dating prospects were slim. Enter Persephone. She was the daughter of Demeter, the goddess of agriculture, and Zeus. She was known as Kore, or the Maiden. She was the personification of spring, flowers, and everything nice. Her mother, Demeter, was extremely protective. She was the ultimate helicopter parent, except her helicopter was the ability to make wheat grow. She kept Persephone close, basically shielding her from the messy politics of Olympus. Hades, presumably watching from a shadowy vent somewhere, decided he wanted to marry Persephone. Now usually, you'd ask the girl, or at least take her out for nectar and ambrosia first. But Hades, being socially awkward and a king who was used to taking what he wanted, went to his brother Zeus and asked for permission. Zeus, who never wanted to deal with conflict and probably just wanted Hades to go back underground, said, "Sure, go ahead. But don't tell Demeter. She'll freak out." So, we have the setup for the abduction. Persephone is out in a field in Sicily, picking flowers, specifically a narcissus, which Gaia had grown just to trap her, when the ground splits open. Out comes Hades in his black chariot. He grabs her, pulls her in, and the ground zips back up. It was a very efficient kidnapping. No witnesses, except for the sun, who sees everything but usually keeps his mouth shut. Down in the Underworld, Hades actually tried to be a decent husband, in his own weird way. He gave her the title Queen of the Dead. He treated her with respect. He probably showed her his gem collection. "Look, honey, this is a diamond the size of a pumpkin. It's yours." But up on the surface, things were not going well. Demeter realized her daughter was missing and went full, scorched earth, policy. Literally. She stopped doing her job. The crops died. The leaves fell. The earth turned cold and barren. Humanity started starving, which meant the sacrifices to the gods stopped coming in. This is the triangle. Hades wanted his wife, Demeter wanted her daughter, and poor Persephone was stuck in the middle, probably eating takeout in a palace made of obsidian. Eventually, Zeus had to intervene because the mortals were dying out, and the gods were getting hungry without the barbecue sacrifices. He sent Hermes, the celestial messenger boy, down to the underworld to tell Hades, "Look, you have to give her back. Her mom is destroying the ecosystem." Hades, surprisingly, agreed. He played it cool. He said, "Okay, sure. If she wants to go, she can go." But he was tricky. Before she left, he offered her a snack. A pomegranate. Now, there is a very specific rule in the underworld. If you eat the food of the dead, you belong to the dead. You can't leave. Persephone ate a few seeds. Some say 4, some say 6. It depends on whose calendar you're using. So when she got back upstairs to her mother, Demeter was overjoyed, until she found out about the snack. She threw another fit. The gods held an emergency arbitration meeting. The ruling was the first joint custody agreement in history. For the number of seeds she ate, Persephone had to spend that many months a year in the underworld with her husband. The rest of the year, she could live with her mother. This is why we have seasons. When Persephone is with her mom, Demeter is happy, and we get spring and summer. When Persephone has to go back to her gloomy husband, Demeter gets depressed, sits on the couch, and freezes the world, giving us winter. It's a very dramatic way to explain why it snows, but it shows that even gods have to deal with awkward in-law arrangements. And frankly, Persephone seemed to eventually kind of like being queen of the underworld. She got to boss around ghosts and look scary. It was probably a nice break from her mom constantly hovering over her. Let's drift away from the gods for a bit and look at the mortals again. Specifically, let's look at Jason. You remember Jason? The guy with the Argonauts. The guy who went after the Golden Fleece. Jason is a prime example of a guy who peaked in college and then made a series of terrible decisions in his 30s. And his biggest mistake was getting involved in a love triangle with a woman who was infinitely smarter and scarier than he was. We're talking about the triangle of Jason, Medea, and Glossy. So, Jason arrives in Colchis to steal the Golden Fleece. It's an impossible task. The king of Colchis sets him up to fail with fire-breathing bulls and skeleton warriors. Jason, frankly, wasn't up to it. He was handsome and bravish, but not the sharpest spear in the phalanx. Luckily for him, the king's daughter, Medea, fell in love with him. Medea wasn't just a princess. She was a powerful sorceress and a devotee of Hecate, the goddess of witchcraft. She took one look at Jason and decided, "I'm going to fix his life." She gave him a magic ointment so the fire-breathing bulls couldn't burn him. She told him how to beat the skeletons. She even led him to the fleece and put the dragon guarding it to sleep. Basically, she did all the work. Jason just stood there and looked heroic holding the shiny wool. Then they fled. Medea abandoned her family, killed her own brother to distract her father, which is a major red flag that Jason chose to ignore, and sailed off with the Argonauts. They get back to Greece. They have adventures. Medea uses her magic to save Jason's skin time and time again. They settle down in Corinth, have 2 kids, and live as exiles. You'd think Jason would be grateful. You'd think he'd realize that his wife is a terrifyingly powerful witch who literally killed her own sibling for him, and maybe he should treat her well. But no. Jason gets bored. Or maybe he gets ambitious. The king of Corinth, Creon, had a daughter named Glossy. She was young, pretty, and most importantly, a ticket to legitimate royalty. Jason, currently just a washed-up hero living in a guest house, decided he wanted an upgrade. He engaged himself to Glossy. And then, and this is the part where you have to marvel at the audacity, he went to Medea and tried to explain it to her logically. He basically said, "Look, honey, I'm doing this for us. If I marry the princess, our kids will have royal half-siblings. It's a networking opportunity. You should be happy for me." Imagine saying that to a woman who knows how to brew poisons that can melt stone. Medea, understandably, did not take this well. She pointed out, "I betrayed my father, killed my brother, and used dark magic for you. And now you're dumping me for a younger model?" Jason shrugged. He told her she was being hysterical, and that she should just accept the exile the king of Corinth had just ordered for her. Yes, they were also kicking her out of the city. Medea stopped arguing. She went quiet. And when a character like Medea goes quiet, you should run to the next continent. She pretended to accept the situation. She even offered a wedding gift to Glossy. "I'm sorry for being difficult," she said. "Here, take this beautiful golden robe and this coronet. It's a peace offering." Jason, being an idiot, thought, "Oh great, she's being reasonable finally." He let his children deliver the gift to the princess. Glossy, loving the shiny new clothes, put them on immediately. "Now I promise no horror, so we'll keep this clinical." The robe was treated with a magical substance that reacted to body heat. It adhered to her. It burned. It was a very bad way to go. Her father, the king, tried to help her and got caught in the trap too. Both of them perished. Jason came running back to Medea, furious, only to find her already leaving. She had killed their children, which is the truly tragic part of this story, the ultimate act of severing her tie to him, and was currently sitting in a chariot pulled by dragons, hovering above the house. She looked down at Jason, who was now a widower, a childless father, and a hated exile with no prospects, and basically said, "This is entirely your fault." Then she flew off to Athens to start a new life. Jason was left alone. He spent the rest of his life wandering around, sad and pathetic. Years later, he was sitting in the shadow of his old ship, the Argo, which was rotting on a beach. He was reminiscing about his glory days. A piece of the rotting timber broke off, fell on his head, and killed him. A fittingly unheroic end for a guy who didn't know how to appreciate a supportive partner. It's a heavy story. So let's take a breath. Let's float away from the burning robes and the dragon chariots. Let's clear the air. Let's move to a love triangle that is less about revenge and more about just pure, unadulterated awkwardness. Let's talk about Hephaestus, Aphrodite, and Ares. This is the classic brain versus brawn setup, but with gods. Hephaestus was the god of the forge. He was the son of Hera. But when he was born, Hera thought he was ugly. So, in a display of stellar parenting, she threw him off Mount Olympus. He fell for a day and a night, landed in the ocean, and was raised by sea nymphs. He grew up to be incredibly skilled at making things, jewelry, robots, weapons. Eventually, he made a golden throne for his mother, Hera. When she sat in it, hidden trap coils sprang out and bound her. She couldn't get up. None of the gods could break the chains. Hephaestus basically held her hostage until they agreed to let him back onto Olympus and give him a seat at the big table. As part of the apology package, or perhaps as a punishment for her vanity, Zeus married Aphrodite, the goddess of love, to Hephaestus. It was the ultimate mismatch. Aphrodite was the most beautiful, glamorous, social entity in existence. Hephaestus was a sweaty, sooty blacksmith who walked with a limp and liked to spend 18 hours a day in his workshop hitting metal with a hammer. Aphrodite was not the type to settle for a quiet life of watching her husband forge horseshoes. She had needs. She liked drama. She liked passion. Enter Ares, the god of war. Ares was everything Hephaestus wasn't. He was tall, muscular, violent, impulsive, and frankly, kind of a jerk. He was the bad boy of Olympus. While Hephaestus was working the night shift at the forge, Ares would come over to the palace. They carried on this affair for a long time. Everyone suspected it. The sun, Helios, who again, is the biggest gossip in Greek mythology because he sees everything from his chariot, saw them together, and went straight to Hephaestus. "Hey man," Helios said. "I don't want to be that guy, but your wife is seeing Ares. Like a lot." Hephaestus didn't get mad. He didn't scream. He didn't challenge Ares to a duel, which would have been suicide anyway. Hephaestus was an engineer. He solved problems with mechanics. He went into his workshop and forged a net. But this wasn't a normal net. It was made of bronze chains so fine and thin they were invisible to the naked eye, like spiderwebs, but stronger than steel. He set the trap around his own marriage bed. Then he announced loudly, "I'm going to Lemnos for the weekend. Don't wait up," and pretended to leave. Ares, watching from the bushes, waited for the coast to clear and then waltzed in. The moment they lay down on the bed, snap! The net fell. It wrapped around them, tightening the more they struggled. They were completely immobilized, caught in a very compromising position. Hephaestus didn't just leave them there. He opened the doors and invited all the other gods to come and look. "Come see!" he shouted. "Come see how my wife honors our marriage!" Poseidon, Hermes, Apollo, they all gathered around. Now, you'd expect them to be solemn or angry. But this is the Greek gods we're talking about. They just started laughing. It was the comedy event of the season. Apollo nudged Hermes and said, "Hey, would you mind being trapped in a net if it meant you were with Aphrodite?" Hermes laughed and said, "I'd take 3 nets." Ares was humiliated. Aphrodite was embarrassed, but mostly just annoyed that her fun was spoiled. Poseidon eventually convinced Hephaestus to let them go, promising that Ares would pay a fine. Ares ran off to Thrace to sulk. Aphrodite went to Cyprus to take a spa day and rejuvenate. Hephaestus went back to his forge, probably feeling a grim sense of satisfaction. They didn't divorce, by the way. Divorce wasn't really a thing for gods. They just stayed in this weird, dysfunctional arrangement forever. Ares and Aphrodite kept seeing each other, Hephaestus kept working, and everyone just accepted that Thanksgiving dinner was going to be tense. It's a reminder that even if you can throw lightning or change your shape, you can't escape the basic messiness of relationships. We're going to drift now. Away from Olympus. Away from the palaces and the forges. We're going to head out into the wilder parts of Greece. To the forests. Because sometimes, love triangles don't involve 2 men fighting over a woman, or 2 women fighting over a man. Sometimes, they involve a human, a god, and a total lack of situational awareness. We're going to talk about Apollo. Poor Apollo. For a god of prophecy, he really never saw rejection coming. Apollo is interesting because he's the golden boy of the pantheon. Music, poetry, archery, healing, prophecy. He's the guy who was president of every club in high school. But his romantic track record is genuinely abysmal. It's almost statistically impossible for someone that attractive and powerful to be struck out that many times. Let's look at the triangle of Apollo, Daphne, and a tree. Technically, the third point of this triangle is actually Eros, Cupid, again, proving that he is the biggest menace in mythology. Apollo had just killed the Python, a giant snake monster. He was feeling very good about himself. He saw Eros playing with his bow and arrows. Apollo, being arrogant, said, "Hey kid, put that down. Leave the archery to the men. I just killed a giant snake, you know." Eros, who is a primordial god and really shouldn't be talked down to, decided to ruin Apollo's day. He had 2 arrows. One was gold and sharp. It caused uncontrollable love. The other was lead and blunt. It caused uncontrollable disgust and hatred. He shot Apollo with the gold arrow. He shot Daphne, a lovely river nymph who just wanted to hike and be left alone, with the lead arrow. So, Apollo falls madly in love with Daphne the second he sees her. Daphne takes one look at Apollo and is repulsed. She runs. He chases. It's the worst rom-com setup in history. Apollo is shouting things like, "Wait! You don't understand! I'm a god! I'm rich! I play the lyre!" Daphne is sprinting through the woods thinking, EW, get away. She runs until she can't run anymore. She reaches the river bank, her father's domain. She prays, "Dad, help me! Destroy this beauty that makes me so attractive! Change me!" Her father, the river god Peneus, hears her. He doesn't send a chariot or fight Apollo. He just grants her wish literally. Her feet turn into roots. Her skin turns into bark. Her arms become branches. Her hair becomes leaves. By the time Apollo catches up to her, she is a laurel tree. Apollo hugs the tree. He can still feel the heartbeat under the bark. He's heartbroken. But being Apollo, he decides to make it about him. Well, he says, if you can't be my wife, you shall be my tree. I will wear your leaves as a crown. Winners of games will wear you. Poets will wear you. So he breaks off a branch and makes a wreath. Which, if you think about it, is a little creepy. I love you so much I'm going to wear parts of your transformed body as a hat forever. And that is why the laurel wreath is a symbol of victory. It's a monument to a stalker who wouldn't take no for an answer and a woman who literally chose to become lumber rather than go on a date with him. It's quiet in the forest now. The leaves are rustling. The gods have moved on to other disasters. Let's take a moment here. Just breathe. The ancient world is full of chaos, but looking back at it from this distance, it's all just stories. Soft, faded stories. We have time for one more little detour before we really settle in. Let's talk about a triangle that involves a mortal who is just too good-looking for his own good. Adonis. But we'll save the full tragedy for a moment. First, let's just imagine the scene. A cool forest glade. Soft moss. No gods shouting. No dragons. Just the quiet hum of nature. It's the perfect place to rest. The most beautiful man and the vegetable garden of doom. So, we are back in the woods. It's quiet here, except for the occasional sound of a deity turning a human into foliage. We were about to discuss Adonis. Now, Adonis is the ultimate example of pretty privilege going horribly wrong. He is the standard by which all other ancient male beauty was measured. If you were a guy in ancient Greece and someone called you an Adonis, you were doing very well. If they called you a Hephaestus, you probably needed to work on your skincare routine. But Adonis's story starts with a family tree that is more of a wreath. It's a circle. It involves his mother, Myrrha, and a curse from Aphrodite, because Aphrodite is essentially the executive producer of all these dramas. Long story short, Myrrha offended the goddess, got cursed to fall in love with her own father, I know, standard Greek mess, and eventually fled to the wilderness where the gods took pity on her and turned her into a myrrh tree. So Adonis was born from a tree. A wild boar charged the tree, cracked the bark, and out popped a baby. Aphrodite happened to be walking by. She saw the baby and thought, "Oh, he is going to be trouble." She decided to adopt him. But Aphrodite wasn't really the diaper-changing type. She had parties to go to and wars to start. So she put the baby Adonis into a chest, a literal wooden box, and took him down to the underworld. She gave the box to Persephone. "Hey," Aphrodite said, "can you watch this for me? Don't open it. I'll be back in a few years." Persephone, who we already established spends half her year in a gloomy obsidian palace with a husband who counts gemstones for fun, was bored. Of course she opened the box. She saw the baby, realized he was adorable, and decided to raise him. Fast forward 15 years or so. Adonis grows up in the underworld. He's pale, brooding, and incredibly handsome. He's basically the ancient equivalent of a gothic romance novel cover model. Persephone falls in love with him. Then Aphrodite comes back. "Okay," she says. "I'm back from my trip. Give me the box." Persephone looks at her and says, "No. I raised him. I fed him ghost food. He's mine." So now we have two powerful goddesses, one who controls love and beauty, and one who is the queen of the dead, fighting over a teenager who probably just wanted to go hunting. They took the argument to Zeus. Zeus, by this point in history, was absolutely sick of mediating domestic disputes. He looked at the two screaming goddesses, looked at the confused boy, and rubbed his temples. "I am not dealing with this," Zeus said. "Calliope, you handle it." Calliope was the muse of epic poetry. She liked structure. She looked at the situation and came up with a timeshare agreement. It's remarkably similar to the Persephone/Demeter deal, which proves that the Greek gods really only had one legal precedent for custody battles. The year would be divided into 3 parts. For 1/3 of the year, Adonis would stay in the underworld with Persephone. For 1/3 of the year, he would stay on Mount Olympus with Aphrodite. And for the final third, he would be left alone to do whatever he wanted. It seemed fair. It gave everyone a break. But Adonis, who knew which side his bread was buttered on, decided to use his free time third to stay with Aphrodite. So she effectively got him for 2/3 of the year. Persephone was not pleased. She felt cheated. She went back to the underworld and probably complained to Hades, who just grunted and went back to petting his 3-headed dog. But the story doesn't end with a happy timeshare. Because there's always a jealous ex. Remember Ares? The god of war? The guy who got caught in the net? He was still Aphrodite's main squeeze. And he noticed that she was spending an awful lot of time with this pretty boy from the tree. Ares wasn't the type to write poetry or send passive-aggressive letters. He was the god of violence. One day, Adonis was out hunting. He loved hunting. It was his main hobby. He was chasing a wild boar. Now, some sources say the boar was just a boar. A big, angry pig. But other sources, the ones that like drama, say the boar was Ares in disguise. Or maybe Ares sent the boar. Either way, the boar was not in a good mood. Adonis threw his spear. He wounded the beast, but didn't kill it. The boar charged. It gored Adonis in the leg. Aphrodite heard his cries from her chariot in the sky, which was pulled by swans. She flew down, but she was too late. The most beautiful man in the world bled out on the forest floor. As he died, Aphrodite sprinkled nectar on his blood, and from the mixture, the anemone flower bloomed. It's a delicate red flower that the wind blows open and the wind blows away. Very poetic. Very tragic. Persephone got him back in the end, though. Because when you die, you go to the underworld. So technically, Persephone won the custody battle by default. She got him for eternity. Aphrodite just got a flower. It's a grim reminder that in Greek mythology, winning usually just means you survive long enough to be miserable about the outcome. Let's leave the flowers and the sad goddesses. Let's get on a boat. The sea is calm tonight. The waves are just gently lapping against the hull. Slap, swish. Slap, swish. We're sailing to the island of Naxos. It's a nice island. Good beaches. Excellent vineyards. And it's the setting for one of the most famous cases of ghosting in history. This is the triangle of Theseus, Ariadne, and Dionysus. Theseus is often called a hero. But if you actually look at his resume, he's mostly just a guy who uses people and then forgets about them. He's the guy who borrows your car, scratches the bumper, returns it with an empty tank, and doesn't say thank you. You know the backstory? The Minotaur. The labyrinth in Crete. King Minos was feeding young Athenians to the monster in the maze. Theseus volunteered to go kill the beast. When he got to Crete, he met Ariadne, the daughter of King Minos. She was a princess, smart, and unfortunately, she fell for Theseus immediately. Theseus gave her the whole speech. "Help me, and I'll take you away from here. We'll get married. You'll be queen of Athens. It'll be great." Ariadne, who was desperate to get off the island, agreed. She went to Daedalus, the guy who built the maze, and asked for the cheat codes. He gave her a ball of magical thread. She gave it to Theseus. "Here," she said. "Tie this to the door. Unravel it as you go in. Kill the cowman. Follow the string back out. Don't die." It was a solid plan. Theseus went in, beat the Minotaur, mostly by punching it, which seems ill-advised but worked, followed the string, and came out covered in glory and monster gore. He grabbed Ariadne, they ran to his ship, and they sailed away in the dead of night. Everything seemed perfect. They were in love. They were free. They stopped at the island of Naxos to get supplies and have a rest. They had a nice picnic on the beach. They drank some wine. They fell asleep under the stars. Then, the sun came up. Ariadne woke up. She stretched, looked around, and realized something was missing. The ship. Theseus had woken up early, gathered his crew, and left. He just left her there, sleeping on the sand. No note. No. It's not you, it's me. Just gone. Some historians try to make excuses for him. They say, oh, maybe a god told him to leave. Or, maybe he forgot. You don't forget the princess who just saved your life. He just didn't want the baggage. He was heading back to Athens to be king, and he probably thought a Cretan wife would be politically complicated. So he dumped her on a deserted island. Ariadne stood on the cliffs of Naxos, watching the sail disappear over the horizon, weeping. She was stranded. She had betrayed her father, so she couldn't go home. She had no money, no ship, no friends. Enter the third point of the triangle. She hears music. Drums. Flutes. The sound of wild partying coming from the woods. Out comes Dionysus, the god of wine, madness, and theater. He's riding a chariot pulled by leopards, or sometimes panthers, depending on the artist's mood. He's surrounded by satyrs and maenads. He is the life of the cosmic party. He sees Ariadne crying on the beach. Most gods would just walk on by, or turn her into a bird to stop the noise. But Dionysus was different. He was actually quite a romantic. He walked up to her and said, "Hey, forget that guy. He wears sandals with socks. You can do better." He offered her a cup of wine. He offered her his hand. He didn't offer to make her a queen of a city. He offered to make her a goddess. Ariadne, realizing that trading a flaky mortal hero for an immortal party god was a massive upgrade, said yes. They got married right there on the beach. Dionysus gave her a crown made of stars, the Corona Borealis. They had a great life. Unlike most Greek marriages, they actually seemed to like each other. Dionysus wasn't the jealous type, and Ariadne fit right in with his chaotic entourage. Meanwhile, Theseus got his karma. As he was sailing home, he forgot to change the sails of his ship from black to white. His father, King Aegeus, saw the black sails, thought Theseus was dead, and threw himself into the sea. So Theseus became king, but at the cost of his father's life, all because he was too absent-minded to change a piece of cloth. So, Ariadne definitely won that breakup. She's up in the sky now as a constellation. Theseus is just dust. Let's drift a little further. The stars are out. We can see Ariadne's crown twinkling up there. It's nice to have a happy ending once in a while, isn't it? Even if it starts with abandonment. But we can't stay happy for long. This is history, and history is mostly people making bad choices. Let's talk about a triangle that is less about romance and more about professional jealousy and divine pettiness. Let's talk about the weaver, the goddess, and the spider. Arachne and Athena. Now usually, this isn't framed as a love triangle. But if you look at it closely, it is. It's a triangle between Arachne, Athena, and the concept of perfection. They both loved perfection. They both wanted to be the only one who possessed it. Arachne was a mortal girl. She lived in Lydia. She was a weaver. And she was good. Like unbelievably good. People would travel for miles just to watch her weave. The nymphs would come out of the woods to watch her work. Her tapestries were so realistic that birds would try to eat the grapes she wove into the fabric. The problem was, Arachne knew she was good. She was proud. Hubris, the Greeks called it. The fatal flaw. People started saying, "Wow, she must have been taught by Athena herself." Athena was the goddess of crafts and weaving. Arachne heard this and scoffed. "Athena? Please! I taught myself. If Athena thinks she's better, let her come down here and prove it. I'll weave circles around her." You do not challenge the gods to a weave-off. It's rule number 1. But Athena heard it. She came down from Olympus disguised as an old woman. She went to Arachne and gave her a chance to back down. "Listen, dear," the old woman said. "You're talented. But don't disrespect the gods. Ask for forgiveness, And Athena will probably let it slide. Arachne laughed. I don't need forgiveness. I need a challenge. Tell her to show her face. Athena threw off the disguise. She grew 10 feet tall, armor shining, owl on her shoulder. Challenge accepted, she said. They set up 2 looms. The contest began. Athena wove a tapestry depicting the glory of the gods. It showed Zeus on his throne, Poseidon striking the rocks, the majesty of Olympus. It was technically flawless. It was propaganda, but it was beautiful propaganda. High art. Arachne wove something different. She wove a tapestry depicting the scandals of the gods. She wove scenes of Zeus cheating on Hera, which took up a lot of space, Poseidon chasing nymphs, and Apollo acting foolishly. It was a tabloid cover in wool. It was a diss track made of thread. And the worst part? It was better than Athena's. The technique was superior. The shading, the texture, it was perfect. Even Athena couldn't find a single flaw in the stitching. This made Athena furious. Not only had this mortal insulted the gods by depicting their bad behavior, but she had actually won the contest. Athena didn't take losing well. She picked up her shuttle, a heavy wooden tool, and smashed Arachne's tapestry to shreds. Then she hit Arachne on the head. You want to weave? Athena shouted. Fine. You and your descendants will weave forever. But you'll do it in the dust. She sprinkled some juice from Hecate's herbs onto the girl. Arachne's nose fell off. Her ears fell off. Her fingers grew long and thin and hairy. Her body shrank. Her belly grew round. She became the first spider. So now, Arachne sits in the corners of dusty rooms, weaving webs that are technically perfect geometric structures. And Athena went back to Olympus, probably feeling a little bit petty but justified. It's a lesson in staying humble. Or at least, if you're going to insult a goddess, maybe don't do it to her face while she's holding a heavy wooden object. We're drifting along now. The web is spun. The thread is cut. Let's move to something a bit more watery. Let's talk about a triangle involving the ocean, a monster, and a rock. You've heard of Scylla and Charybdis? The monsters Odysseus had to sail between? Caught between a rock and a hard place. Well, Scylla wasn't always a 6-headed monster who ate sailors. She started out as a lovely sea nymph. And her downfall was, once again, a messy love triangle. This one involves Glaucus. Not the glossy who burned up earlier. Different Glaucus. The Greeks reused names like they reused plot points. Glaucus was a fisherman who ate a magical herb and turned into a sea god. He grew a fish tail, his hair turned green, and he became immortal. He was swimming around exploring his new powers when he saw Scylla sitting on the shore, combing her hair. He fell in love. He swam up to the rocks and tried to chat her up. Hey, he gurgled. I'm a sea god. You're a sea nymph. We should go for dinner. Maybe some kelp? Scylla looked at him, blue skin, barnacles, fish tail, and was terrified. She ran away up the mountain. Glaucus was heartbroken. He swam to the island of Circe. You know Circe. The sorceress who turns men into pigs. She was the local expert on potions and love problems. Glaucus told her, I love Scylla, but she won't give me the time of day. Can you brew a love potion for me? Now, here is the triangle. Circe took one look at Glaucus and thought, actually, he's kind of cute. In a fishy way. She fell in love with Glaucus. She told him, forget that little nymph. She's boring. Look at me. I'm a powerful witch goddess. Let's make this work. Glaucus, proving that men in myths are incapable of reading the room, said, no thanks. My heart belongs to Scylla. Leaves will grow on the ocean floor and seaweed on the mountains before I love anyone else. Which was a very poetic way of saying, I'm not interested. Circe was offended. She wasn't used to rejection. But she didn't get mad at Glaucus. She got mad at Scylla. If I can't have him, she thought, she definitely can have him. Circe brewed a potion. But it wasn't a love potion. It was a turn you into a nightmare abomination. Potion. She swam to the little bay where Scylla liked to take her baths. She poured the poison into the water. The next day, Scylla came down for a dip. She waded into the water up to her waist. Suddenly, she felt something weird happening to her legs. She looked down. Her legs were gone. In their place were 6 snarling, barking dog heads attached to long, serpentine necks. She screamed. She tried to run, but she couldn't, because her legs were now dogs. She was rooted to the spot. She grew giant and monstrous. Her mind twisted. She became a terror of the sea, snatching sailors off passing ships with her 6 heads. Glaucus swam by later, saw what had happened, and wept. But he couldn't fix it. He just swam away. Circe sat in her palace, probably stirring a cauldron, thinking, "Well, that settles that." And Scylla, she looked down. Her legs were gone. In their place were 6 snarling, barking dog heads attached to long, serpentine necks. She screamed. She tried to run, but she couldn't, because her legs were now dogs. She was rooted to the spot. She grew giant and monstrous. Her mind twisted. She became a terror of the sea, snatching sailors off passing ships with her 6 heads. Glaucus swam by later, saw what had happened, and wept. But he couldn't fix it. He just swam away. Circe sat in her palace, probably stirring a cauldron, thinking, "Well, that settles that." And Scylla spent the rest of eternity sitting on a rock, eating unsuspecting tourists. It just goes to show that if you ask a witch for a favor, make sure she doesn't have a crush on you first. We're going deep now. The water is dark and cold. The monsters are sleeping. We have time for one more story in this segment. One more tangled web of affection and disaster. Let's talk about Echo and Narcissus. It's a quiet story. A story of reflections and voices. The girl who couldn't start a sentence and the boy who couldn't look away. So, we've left the angry seas and the dog-legged monsters behind. Let's drift back inland. To a nice, quiet valley. A place where the air is still and sound travels a long way. We're going to talk about Echo and Narcissus. This is perhaps the most famous story of unrequited love in the ancient world, and it features 2 people who were tragically unsuited for any kind of relationship. A woman who literally couldn't speak her mind, and a man who was incapable of caring about anyone other than the person in the mirror. Let's start with Echo. Echo was a mountain nymph. She was lovely, kind, and she had one major defining trait: she loved to talk. She could talk the hind legs off a donkey. She was the life of the party, always telling stories, always gossiping. Now, usually, being a chatterbox is fine. Annoying, maybe, but harmless. But Echo made the mistake of using her conversational skills to aid and abet Zeus. Zeus, as we have established, was constantly trying to sneak away from his wife, Hera, to visit other nymphs. Hera, being suspicious, would come down from Olympus to catch him in the act. Echo's job was to intercept Hera. She would bounce up to the queen of the gods and start talking. "Oh, Hera! You look stunning today! Is that a new tunic? Let me tell you about this deer I saw yesterday. It had the weirdest antlers. And did you hear what the river god said to the dryad?" She would just keep talking and talking, stalling Hera long enough for Zeus to sneak out the back door. Eventually, Hera caught on. She realized she was being filibustered. Hera was not a goddess who appreciated being managed. She looked at Echo and said essentially, "You like using your tongue? Fine. From now on, you will never be able to speak first. You will only be able to repeat the last few words that are spoken to you." It was a surgically precise punishment. For a girl who loved to tell stories, it was a living nightmare. She was reduced to being a human parrot. So, Echo retreated to the woods, ashamed and silent. Enter Narcissus. Narcissus was the son of a river god and a nymph. When he was born, his mother asked the blind prophet Tiresias if the boy would live a long life. Tiresias gave one of his classic cryptic answers. "He will live long, provided he never knows himself." Nobody knew what that meant, so they just shrugged and raised him. Narcissus grew up to be, Without exaggeration, the most beautiful human being on the planet. Men loved him. Women loved him. Probably even the trees leaned in a little when he walked by. But Narcissus was completely indifferent. He had a heart of stone. He rejected everyone who ever offered him affection, usually with a sneer. He was the original, too cool for school archetype. One day, Narcissus was out hunting deer in the woods. He got separated from his friends. He was wandering around, looking for the path. Echo saw him. She was hiding in the bushes. She fell in love instantly. She wanted to run out and introduce herself, maybe use a cheesy pickup line. But she couldn't. The curse held her tongue. She had to wait for him to speak. Narcissus, realizing he was lost, shouted out, "Is anyone here?" Echo, delighted, jumped on the last word. "Here!" she shouted back from the bushes. Narcissus looked around. He couldn't see anyone. "Come to me!" he yelled. "To me!" Echo replied happily. Narcissus was confused. "Why do you run from me?" "Run from me!" Echo said. Narcissus, getting impatient, shouted, "Let us meet together!" This was exactly what Echo wanted to hear. "Let us meet together!" she cried. She burst out of the bushes, arms open, ready for a hug. Narcissus took one look at her and recoiled. He was horrified. "Hands off!" he shouted. "I would die before I give you power over me!" Echo, crushed, could only whisper the last words back. "Power over me!" Narcissus turned and stormed off, leaving her standing there. Echo was so humiliated, so heartbroken, that she went and hid in a lonely cave. She stopped eating. She stopped sleeping. She just lay there, pining away. Slowly, her body faded. Her skin vanished. Her bones turned to stone. Until finally, nothing was left but her voice. That's why, when you shout into a canyon, the canyon shouts back. It's just poor Echo, still trying to get the last word in. But Narcissus didn't get off scot-free. You don't just go around breaking hearts with that level of arrogance without attracting the attention of Nemesis. Nemesis is the goddess of divine retribution. She's the one who ensures that people who have too much good fortune or too much pride get taken down a peg. She heard about what Narcissus did to Echo, and several other suitors he had spurned. One hot summer day, Narcissus was tired and thirsty after hunting. He found a pool of water in the deep woods. It was a perfect pool. The water was silver and clear. No shepherds had ever disturbed it. No goats had drunk from it. No leaves had fallen in it. It was like a mirror. Narcissus knelt down to take a drink. As he bent over the water, he saw a face. He didn't realize it was a reflection. He thought it was a water spirit living in the pool. And because it was his own face, it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He fell in love. Instantly. Harder than anyone had ever fallen in love with him. He tried to kiss the reflection, but when his lips touched the water, the image rippled and vanished. He tried to hug it, but his arms just went through the water. He was baffled. "Why do you flee from me?" he asked the water. "I am beautiful. Everyone says so." He stayed there for days. He couldn't leave. He stopped eating. He just stared at himself. He was suffering the exact same fate he had inflicted on others, loving someone who could not love him back. Eventually, he realized the truth. "Oh," he whispered, "it is me. I am burning with love for myself." But even knowing it, he couldn't stop looking. He wasted away by the pool, his beauty fading as he died of sorrow and starvation. When the wood nymphs came to collect his body for the funeral, it was gone. In its place was a flower with white petals and a yellow center. The narcissus. It's a cautionary tale about vanity, sure. But mostly it's a story about how you should probably just be nice to people who say hello to you in the woods. Let's drift away from that sad little pool. The water is still again. The reflection is gone. We're going to move to a slightly different kind of tragedy. A tragedy of misunderstandings. Because sometimes you don't need a curse or a vengeance goddess to ruin a relationship. Sometimes, all you need is a slight breeze and a paranoid partner. This is the story of Cephalus and Procris. Cephalus was a prince of Athens. He was handsome, noble, and happily married to Procris, who was the daughter of the king of Athens. They were the it couple of their day. They actually loved each other, which, as we've seen, is rare. But their marriage was plagued by a series of tests. First, Eos, the goddess of the dawn, who has a terrible habit of kidnapping attractive mortal men, snatched Cephalus up. She tried to seduce him. Cephalus refused. He kept talking about how much he loved his wife, Procris. Eos got annoyed. "Fine," she said. "Go back to your wife. But I bet she isn't as faithful as you are. Why don't you test her?" Eos changed Cephalus's appearance so he looked like a stranger. He went home and tried to seduce his own wife. Procris held out for a long time, but eventually, after he offered her a literal fortune in gold and jewels, she wavered. Cephalus revealed himself and shouted, "Aha! I caught you!" Procris was humiliated, rightly so, since her husband had just entrapped her, and ran away to the mountains to join the huntress goddess Artemis. Eventually they made up. Procris came back. She brought 2 gifts from Artemis to apologize: a hunting dog that never failed to catch its prey, and a javelin that never missed its mark. She gave the javelin to Cephalus because he loved hunting. It was a sweet gesture. "Here, honey, have a magic spear." They were happy again. For a while. But Cephalus had a habit. Every morning, he would go out hunting with his magic spear. After he was tired and sweaty, he would find a shady spot on a hill, lie down, and call out for a cool breeze to refresh him. He would say things like, "Come, sweet Aura. Soothing breeze. Come to my breast. Relieve this heat that burns me." Aura is the Greek word for breeze. But it also sounds like a woman's name. A neighbor was walking by one day and heard Cephalus passionately inviting Aura to come and caress him. The neighbor, being a terrible person, ran straight to Procris. "Procris," the neighbor said, "I hate to tell you this, but your husband is meeting a woman named Aura in the woods every day. I heard him begging her to come to him." Procris was devastated. She remembered the whole disguise test from earlier and figured turnabout was fair play. She decided to catch him in the act. The next morning, she followed Cephalus into the woods. She hid in a thicket of bushes near his favorite resting spot. Cephalus finished his hunt. He was hot. He sat down. He opened his tunic and shouted, "Come, Aura! Come to me, sweet breeze!" Procris, hearing the name, let out a little sob of grief. Cephalus heard the rustle in the bushes. He heard the sob. But his hunter's brain took over. He thought, "That sounds like a wild animal hiding in the brush." He didn't hesitate. He had a javelin that never missed. He threw it. The spear flew into the bushes. He heard a scream. A human scream. Cephalus ran to the bushes and found his wife, pierced by the gift she had given him. She died in his arms. Her last words were, Promise me you won't marry that woman Aura." Cephalus had to explain, as she bled out, that he was literally talking to the wind. It's just incomprehensibly tragic. And stupid. It's a tragedy of stupidity. If they had just communicated. If the neighbor hadn't been a gossip. If Cephalus had just brought a fan instead of shouting at the weather. But that's Greek myth for you. Let's wash that sadness away. Let's look up. Look at the sky. It's night time in our story now. The moon is full and bright. And speaking of the moon, let's talk about a love story that is actually perfect for this script. It is the sleepiest love story of all time. It is the story of Selene and Endymion. Selene is the Titan goddess of the moon. Before Artemis took over the moon branding, Selene was the one driving the silver chariot across the sky every night. She was luminous, beautiful, and ancient. One night, as she was driving her chariot over the mountains of Latmus, she looked down. She saw a shepherd sleeping in a cave. His name was Endymion. Endymion was, well, he was just a shepherd, But he was incredibly handsome. He looked so peaceful sleeping there, bathed in the moonlight. Selene fell in love with him. She parked her chariot, or put it on autopilot. The myths are vague on the mechanics of lunar parking, and floated down to the cave. She watched him sleep. She didn't want to wake him up. She came back the next night. And the next. She became obsessed with his sleeping form. But there was a problem. Selene was immortal. Endymion was mortal. He would grow old. He would wake up, get wrinkles, get cranky, and eventually die. Selene didn't want that. She wanted this moment of peaceful beauty to last forever. So she went to Zeus. It always comes back to Zeus. She asked Zeus for a favor. "I love this shepherd," she said, "but I can't bear the thought of him dying. Can you grant him eternal youth?" Zeus thought about it. Usually, he doesn't hand out immortality like candy. It causes problems. But he had a soft spot for Selene. Or maybe he just thought the solution was funny. "Okay," Zeus said. "I will grant him eternal youth. But there's a catch. To stay young forever, he must sleep forever." Selene agreed. So, Endymion was put into an eternal, ageless sleep. He never woke up. He never aged a day. He just lay there in the cave, perfectly beautiful, perfectly still. Every night, Selene would drive her moon chariot across the sky, and when she passed over Mount Latmus, she would stop. She would go down and visit her sleeping boyfriend. She would kiss him, stroke his hair, and just sit with him in the silence. And the weirdest part? According to the myths, they had 50 daughters together. The Menai. They represented the 50 months of the Olympiad. How exactly one has 50 children with a man who is in a comatose state is a biological question we are not going to ask tonight. We are just going to accept it as moon magic. But in a way, it's the only successful relationship we've talked about. No arguments. No jealousy. No turning into trees. Just a guy getting a really, really long nap, and a woman who loves watching him sleep. It sounds kind of nice, doesn't it? Just sleeping. Forever. No alarm clocks. No emails. Just the moon watching over you. Let's leave Endymion to his nap. We wouldn't want to wake him. We're going to drift to one final story for this section. One that bridges the gap between the divine and the mortal, and features perhaps the most dramatic mother-son dynamic in history. We are talking about Thetis, Peleus, and the wedding that started it all. We began this night with the Trojan War, and now we circle back to the parents of the guy who won it, Achilles. Thetis was a sea nymph. A Nereid. She was destined for greatness. There was a prophecy about her, another prophecy, they are everywhere. It said that Thetis would bear a son who would be greater than his father. Zeus and Poseidon had both been chasing Thetis. They both wanted to marry her. But as soon as they heard that prophecy, they slammed on the brakes. Neither of them wanted a son who was stronger than them. That's how Zeus overthrew his father, Cronus, and how Cronus overthrew his father, Uranus. They wanted this cycle to stop. So they decided to marry her off to a mortal. That way, the son would just be a really awesome human, but not a god-toppling threat. They picked Peleus. He was an Argonaut, he knew Jason, a king, and a decent guy. Thetis, however, was a goddess. She did not want to marry a mortal. She felt it was a downgrade. So when Peleus came to court her, which in this context meant catching her on the beach, she fought back. Thetis was a shapeshifter. Peleus grabbed her. She turned into fire. He held on. She turned into water. He held on. She turned into a lion. A snake. A tree. A giant squid. Peleus just held on. He had been given advice by the centaur Chiron on how to handle this. "Just don't let go," Chiron had said. "She'll tire out eventually." And she did. She turned back into a woman and sighed. "Fine," she said. "You're persistent. I'll marry you." They had a massive wedding. All the gods were invited. It was the social event of the century. They feasted on the slopes of Mount Pelion. The muses sang. And it was at this wedding, This forced union between a reluctant sea goddess and a stubborn mortal, that Eris, the goddess of discord, showed up. She was the only one not invited. She threw the golden apple marked to the fairest onto the table. And we know what happened next. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite started fighting. Paris was chosen. Helen was stolen. Troy fell. All because Zeus was afraid of a prophecy about a baby who hadn't been born yet. And the baby? That was Achilles. Thetis tried to make him immortal by dipping him in the river Styx, holding him by his heel. We all know how that worked out. The heel stayed dry. The vulnerability remained. It's a reminder that no matter how hard you try to engineer destiny, there's always one little dry spot on the heel that ruins everything. The fire is dying down now. The embers are glowing soft red. The stories are blending together. Nymphs, gods, trees, stars. They're all just swirling in the mist. We have time for just a little more drifting. Just a little more wandering through the ancient wreckage. Let's think about Orpheus, the musician. The man who loved a woman so much he walked into hell to get her back. The musician who looked back and the king who touched gold. We left off standing at the gates of the underworld, listening for the faint strumming of a lyre. We are talking about Orpheus. Orpheus was the greatest musician of his age. They say that when he played his lyre, which is basically a small, portable harp for people who like to look thoughtful, birds would stop flying to listen. Rivers would stop flowing. Even trees would pull up their roots and scoot a little closer to hear the melody. He was the ancient equivalent of that guy who brings an acoustic guitar to a campfire and forces everyone to have an emotional breakthrough, whether they want to or not. Orpheus fell in love with Eurydice. She was a nymph, or maybe a princess, the details are fuzzy. But they were young, beautiful, and sickeningly happy. They decided to get married. The wedding day, however, was a disaster from the start. Hymen, the god of marriage ceremonies, showed up, but his torch wouldn't stay lit. It just smoked and sputtered, filling the room with tear-inducing fumes. In ancient Greece, a smoky wedding torch is the equivalent of rain on your wedding day, except it meant doom instead of good luck. After the ceremony, Eurydice went for a walk in the meadow with her bridesmaids. She was dancing, laughing, probably not watching where she was putting her feet. She stepped on a viper. The snake bit her heel. She died instantly. One moment, a happy bride. The next, a shade on the way to the ferryman. Orpheus was inconsolable. He didn't just cry. He played music about it. He wandered the world playing songs so depressing that the nymphs wept and the gods covered their ears. Finally, he decided that if he couldn't stop being sad, he would just go and fix the problem. He walked to the entrance of the underworld. Now, usually, living people don't get into the land of the dead. Charon, the ferryman, doesn't take passengers with a pulse. But Orpheus started playing. He played a song so beautiful and heartbreaking that Charon stopped pulling the boat. The three-headed dog, Cerberus, lay down and whimpered. Orpheus just walked right past them. He went all the way to the throne room of Hades and Persephone. He stood before the king and queen of the dead and played his set list. It was a powerful performance. We're told that for the first time in eternity, the cheeks of the Furies were wet with tears. Sisyphus sat on his rock and took a break. Tantalus forgot he was thirsty. Even Hades, the stoic manager of the afterlife, felt a lump in his throat. Hades agreed to break the one rule of his kingdom. "Okay," he said. "You can take her back. She's behind you right now. Walk to the surface. She will follow. But there is one condition. It's always a condition. You must not look back at her until you are both fully out of the underworld and into the sunlight." It seems simple. Just walk forward. Don't turn your head. It's not a complex instruction. It's easier than assembling flat-pack furniture. Orpheus thanked them and started walking. He walked through the caverns, past the river Styx, up the steep, winding path toward the daylight. He could hear Eurydice's footsteps behind him. Soft, faint footsteps. He walked for miles. He saw the light ahead. The opening of the cave. He was 10 feet away from success. 5 feet. He stepped out into the sunlight. And then, in a moment of catastrophic anxiety, or maybe he just wanted to double-check that she was actually there and not just a hallucination, he turned around. He saw her. She was still in the cave, just a few steps behind. She hadn't stepped into the light yet. Since the condition was, "Until you are both out." The deal was broken. Eurydice looked at him. She didn't scream. She just whispered, "Farewell." And then she was pulled backward, dissolving into mist, back down into the dark. Orpheus tried to run after her, but the guards blocked the way this time. You only get one chance to charm the underworld. He went back to the surface and spent the rest of his life wandering around Thrace, playing sad songs and refusing to date anyone else. Eventually, a group of Maenads, wild, partying followers of Dionysus, got tired of his depressing vibe and tore him to pieces. His head floated down the river, still singing. It's a story about trust. And mostly, it's a story about following very simple instructions. If someone tells you, "Don't look back," just keep your eyes on the road. Let's shake off the gloom of the underworld again. Let's talk about gold. Everyone likes gold. But as King Midas found out, you can definitely have too much of a good thing. Midas was the king of Phrygia. He was wealthy, he had a nice rose garden, and he wasn't particularly bright. One day, some of his peasants found an old, drunk man passed out in the rose bushes. They tied him up and brought him to the king. Midas recognized the drunk immediately. It was Silenus, the tutor and drinking buddy of the god Dionysus. Instead of punishing the guy for trespassing, Midas treated him like royalty. He hosted him for 10 days of feasting and drinking. Then he returned him safely to Dionysus. Dionysus was grateful. He said, "Midas, you're a good guy. Ask for anything you want, and I'll grant it." Now, a smart person asks for wisdom, or long life, or a subscription to a really good wine club. Midas asked for money. Specifically, he said, "I want everything I touch to turn to gold." Dionysus looked at him. He probably raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? That seems impractical." "I'm sure," Midas said. "All right," Dionysus shrugged. "Done." Midas was thrilled. He went into his garden. He touched a twig. Ping. It turned to gold. He touched a stone. Ping. Gold nugget. He touched a rose. Ping. A beautiful, lifeless, heavy golden flower. He was ecstatic. "I'm the richest man in the world," he thought. He ran back to the palace to celebrate. He ordered a magnificent feast. The servants brought out bread, meat, fruit, and wine. Midas sat down, hungry from all the alchemy. He picked up a piece of bread. As soon as it touched his lips, it turned into a lump of solid gold. He tried to take a bite of meat. Gold. He tried to drink a cup of wine. Liquid gold flowed down his throat and hardened. It suddenly dawned on him that you cannot eat money. He was panicking. His daughter, seeing her father distressed, ran into the room to comfort him. She hugged him. Ping. Now he had a solid gold statue of his daughter. Which is valuable, sure, but not very good at conversation. Midas realized his mistake. He fell to his knees and prayed to Dionysus. "I take it back. I'm an idiot. Please take this gift away." Dionysus, who was probably watching from a cloud with popcorn, took pity on him. "Go to the river Pactolus," he said. "Wash yourself in the source of the river. The magic will wash off." Midas ran to the river. He jumped in. The gold power flowed out of him and into the water. The sands of the river turned to gold, which, according to legend, is why that river was so rich in gold dust in real life. He went home. He touched his daughter, and she turned back into a human. Everything was fine. Lesson learned: be careful what you wish for. But wait, Midas wasn't done being embarrassing. There's a sequel to the Midas story that often gets left out, and it involves a musical contest and some very unfortunate ears. After the gold incident, Midas decided to leave the city and live in the country. He started hanging out with Pan, the goat-legged god of the wild. Pan played the pipes. He was good, in a rustic, folk music kind of way. Pan got arrogant and challenged Apollo to a music contest. Pan on the pipes versus Apollo on the lyre. The mountain god Molus was the judge. Pan played a jaunty tune. It was catchy. The birds liked it. Midas liked it. Then Apollo played. He played the music of the spheres. It was transcendent. It was the sound of the universe vibrating. Molus, the judge, immediately pointed to Apollo. "Winner," he said. But Midas, who had no business offering his opinion, shouted, "I disagree. I think Pan was better. It had a better beat." Apollo turned his glowing gaze toward Midas. "You prefer the noise of pipes to the harmony of heaven?" Apollo asked. "It must be because your ears are defective. Let me fix them for you so they match your taste." Apollo waved his hand. Midas's ears began to stretch. They grew long. They grew hairy. They started to swivel. He had donkey ears. Midas was mortified. He was a king. He couldn't walk around looking like a farm animal. He started wearing a very large, purple turban to hide them. He wore it everywhere. To court, to dinner, to bed. The only person who knew the secret was his barber. Because eventually, a king needs a haircut. Midas sat the barber down. "Look," he said. "I'm going to take this hat off. If you tell a single living soul what you see, I will have you executed. Clear?" The barber nodded, terrified. Midas took off the turban. The barber cut his hair, ignoring the giant, twitching donkey ears, put the turban back on, and left. But the secret ate away at the barber. He was bursting to tell someone. It was the biggest piece of gossip in the kingdom. "The king is a donkey." He couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He went out to a lonely meadow, far from the city. He dug a deep hole in the ground. He knelt down, put his face into the hole, and whispered as quietly as he could, "King Midas has donkey's ears." He felt better. He filled the hole back up with dirt and went home, thinking the secret was buried. But nature has a sense of humor. A clump of reeds grew over the spot where the barber had dug the hole. When the wind blew through the reeds, they didn't just rustle. They whispered the words that had been buried in the soil. So whenever a breeze came through Phrygia, the grass would whisper to anyone walking by, "King Midas has donkey's ears. King Midas has donkey's ears." Everyone found out. Midas just had to live with it. It's a story about how truth always comes out, usually in the most embarrassing way possible. And also, don't critique a god's musical performance unless you want a physical alteration. Let's drift from gold and donkeys to something a bit more artificial. Let's talk about Pygmalion. We've had gods chasing mortals, mortals chasing gods, and people turning into trees. But what if you just decide that real people are too much of a hassle? Pygmalion was a sculptor who lived on the island of Cyprus. He looked around at the women of his town and decided he didn't like any of them. He thought they were flawed, imperfect, and gossipy. He was a bit of a misogynist, frankly. He swore off marriage. "I will live alone," he said. "I will dedicate my life to art." So he started carving a statue. He worked on it for months. He carved it out of snow-white ivory. It was a statue of a woman. And because he was a master sculptor, it was perfect. It was more beautiful than any living woman. He worked on it so much that he started to lose his grip on reality. He named the statue Galatea. He would talk to it. "Good morning, Galatea. Did you sleep well?" The statue, being a rock, did not answer. He started bringing it gifts. Smooth pebbles, shells, little birds, flowers, things he thought a girl would like. He dressed the statue in fine robes. He put rings on its marble fingers and necklaces of pearls around its neck. He would tuck it into bed at night, and put a pillow under its head so it would be comfortable. It was, to put it mildly, deeply creepy behavior. He had fallen in love with an object he had made himself. The festival of Aphrodite rolled around. Pygmalion went to the temple. He made a sacrifice, a bull, probably, and he prayed. He was too embarrassed to say, "Please make my statue real." So instead he said, "Aphrodite, please give me a wife who is like my ivory statue." Aphrodite heard him. She knew what was going on. She visited his studio, saw the statue, and thought, "Well, it is a very nice statue. And I am the goddess of love, even the weird kinds." She decided to grant the wish. Pygmalion went home. He went to see Galatea. He leaned in to kiss the statue on the cheek, as he usually did. But instead of cold, hard stone, the cheek felt warm. He pulled back. He touched her arm. The ivory yielded to his touch, like wax softening in the sun. He felt a pulse in her wrist. Galatea opened her eyes. She looked at him. Now, imagine waking up and the first thing you see is a guy who has been dressing you up like a doll for 6 months. But apparently she was into it. Or maybe she was just programmed to be into it. They got married. Aphrodite attended the wedding. They had a son named Paphos, who gave his name to the city. It's technically a happy ending. But it's the kind of happy ending that makes you squint a little. A man creates a woman to his exact specifications because he can't deal with a real human partner with flaws and opinions. It's the ancient Greek precursor to AI girlfriends. We've covered a lot of ground tonight. We've been to the underworld, the forests, the palaces, and the sculptor's studio. Let's take a breath. The air is cooling down. The night is getting darker. The stars are wheeling overhead in their slow, silent tracks. Let's move away from romance entirely for a moment. Let's talk about friendship. Or rather, the disastrous ends of friendships. Because in Greek mythology, even having a best friend is an occupational hazard. Let's talk about Hyacinthus. Hyacinthus was a Spartan prince. He was young, athletic, and incredibly handsome. There's a theme here. He had 2 very powerful admirers, Apollo, the god of everything cool, and Zephyrus, the west wind. Apollo and Hyacinthus were best friends. They spent all their time together hunting, doing gymnastics, and playing sports. Zephyrus, the wind god, was jealous. He would blow angrily through the trees whenever he saw them together, but they ignored him. One day, Apollo and Hyacinthus were playing discus. It's basically frisbee, but with a heavy metal plate. Apollo stepped up to throw. He was a god, so he was strong. He launched the discus high into the clouds. It went up, up, up. Hyacinthus, eager to impress his friend, ran out to catch it when it came down. "I got it! I got it!" he shouted. But Zephyrus was watching. The jealous west wind saw his chance. As the heavy discus came plummeting down, Zephyrus blew a sharp gust of air. He knocked the discus off course. Instead of landing in the grass, it slammed into Hyacinthus's head. Apollo ran to him. He tried everything. He used his healing powers, his ambrosia, his nectar. But it was too late. The blow was fatal. Apollo held his dying friend and wept. He said, "I will not let you be forgotten." From the blood that spilled on the grass, Apollo created a flower. The hyacinth. The petals were marked with the letters AI, which is the ancient Greek cry of grief. So every spring, when the hyacinths bloom, it's a reminder of a friendly game of frisbee gone wrong because the wind got jealous. It's all very dramatic, isn't it? Everything is a flower, or a tree, or a constellation. The Greeks couldn't just let people die, they had to turn them into landscaping. But it makes the world feel alive. When you walk through a garden, you aren't just looking at plants. You're looking at a graveyard of tragic lovers and unlucky princes. That laurel tree? That's Daphne hiding from her stalker. That cypress tree? That's Cypressus, who killed his pet deer by accident and asked to mourn forever. That narcissus flower? That's a guy who really liked his own reflection. It's a crowded world. Let's drift to one final story for this part. A story about a race. A foot race. This is the story of Atlanta. Atlanta was a badass. Her father wanted a son, so when she was born, he left her on a mountain, again with the exposure. She was raised by a bear. Yes, a literal bear. Then she was found by hunters. She grew up to be the fastest runner in Greece. She was faster than any man. She was also a fierce hunter. She was the one who drew first blood on the Caledonian boar, the one Meleager killed. Her father eventually realized she was famous and cool, so he invited her back to the palace. "Welcome home," he said. "Now you need to get married." Atalanta didn't want to get married. She liked running and hunting. The oracle had also told her, "Marriage will be your ruin." So she came up with a plan. "I will marry," she said, "but only the man who can beat me in a foot race. If he loses, however, I get to kill him." High stakes. You would think this would deter suitors. But ancient Greek men were nothing if not overconfident. Dozens of them signed up. They raced her. They lost. She speared them. It was brutal. Enter Hippomenes, sometimes called Melanion. He saw Atalanta running. He saw how amazing she was. He fell in love. But he knew he wasn't fast enough to beat her. So, he did what everyone in these stories does: he cheated. Or rather, he used divine intervention. He prayed to Aphrodite. "Aphrodite," he said, "you made me fall for her. Help me win." Aphrodite gave him 3 golden apples. These were special apples from the garden of the Hesperides. They were irresistible. If you saw one, you had to stop and pick it up. The race began. Atalanta gave Hippomenes a head start because she knew she was faster. She zoomed past him. Hippomenes threw the first apple. He rolled it across her path. Atalanta saw the shiny gold fruit. She couldn't help herself. She stopped, scooped it up, and tucked it into her tunic. This cost her a few seconds. Hippomenes got ahead. She caught up to him easily. He threw the second apple. She stopped again. Picked it up. Caught up again. They were near the finish line. Atalanta was breathing down his neck. Hippomenes threw the third apple, way off to the side, into the deep grass. Atalanta hesitated. She looked at the finish line. She looked at the apple. The apple won. She ran off the track to find it. While she was searching in the grass, Hippomenes crossed the finish line. Atalanta, surprisingly, wasn't mad. She was impressed by his strategy. She married him. They were happy. But remember the oracle? Marriage will be your ruin. They made a mistake. One day they were out hunting, and they hooked up in a temple belonging to Zeus, or Cybele, depending on the version. It was sacrilege. The gods were offended. So, they turned them both into lions. The ancient Greeks believed that lions couldn't mate with other lions. They thought lions mated with leopards, for some reason. So by turning them into lions, the gods ensured they could be together, but never together. So now they pulled the chariot of the goddess Cybele. 2 lions side by side, running forever, but never able to embrace. It's a bittersweet ending. But at least they're still running. The woman who opened the jar and the man who flew too close. So we are back on solid ground. We've watched Atalanta and her husband run off into the sunset as lions, which, all things considered, isn't the worst way to go. At least they have each other. But now we need to talk about the beginning of things. We need to talk about why the world is the way it is. Why do we have sickness? Why do we have taxes? Why do we have mournings? According to the Greeks, it's all because of a jar. You've probably heard it called Pandora's box. But that's actually a translation error. When the story was translated from Greek to Latin by a guy named Erasmus way back in the Renaissance, he mistook the Greek word pithos, which means a large storage jar, usually for wine or grain, for pyxis, which means a box. So for centuries, we've been blaming a box. But it was a jar. A big, heavy ceramic jar. The setup for this disaster starts with Prometheus. Prometheus was a titan who really liked humans. He thought we were cool. He stole fire from the gods and gave it to us so we wouldn't freeze in the dark. Zeus was furious. He punished Prometheus, the whole chained to a rock having his liver eaten by an eagle situation, but he also wanted to punish humanity. He decided the best way to punish men was to give them a partner who was just way too complicated for them to handle. He ordered Hephaestus to build the first woman. Hephaestus crafted her out of clay. She was perfect. Athena dressed her in silver robes. Aphrodite gave her grace and desire. Hermes gave her a shameful mind and a deceitful nature, which seems a bit rude, but Hermes loves chaos. They named her Pandora, which means all-gifted. Zeus sent her down to earth as a gift to Epimetheus. Now, Epimetheus was Prometheus's brother. His name literally means afterthought. Prometheus, whose name means forethought, had explicitly warned his brother, "If Zeus sends you a package, do not sign for it. Return to sender." But Epimetheus saw Pandora. She was stunning. She was holding this intriguing large jar. He forgot all his brother's warnings and said, "Come on in." They lived together for a while. Pandora had been given one instruction by the gods regarding her luggage. Do not open the jar. Now, if you hand someone a mysterious sealed container and tell them not to open it, you are guaranteeing that they will open it. It's reverse psychology 101. Pandora was curious. She was designed to be curious. One day, she couldn't take it anymore. She lifted the heavy lid, just to take a peek. Whoosh! Out flew everything bad. Sickness, old age, jealousy, greed, toil, hunger. They buzzed out like a swarm of angry wasps, scattering to the four corners of the earth. Pandora tried to slam the lid back down, but it was too late. The damage was done. The perfect world of the Golden Age was over. But she did manage to trap one thing inside the rim of the jar before she sealed it. Hope. Elpis. Now, philosophers have argued about this for thousands of years. Was hope preserved in the jar so that humans would always have it? Or was hope considered another evil, the evil of false expectation, and keeping it in the jar was actually a mercy? The Greeks were cynical enough that they probably viewed hope as the thing that just prolongs your suffering. But let's be optimists tonight. Let's say she saved hope for a rainy day. It's a heavy story. It explains why life is hard. It's all just containment failure. Let's drift away from the jar. Let's look up at the sky again. It's a clear blue sky today in our story. Perfect flying weather. But remember the oracle? Marriage will be your ruin. They made a mistake. One day, they were out hunting, and they hooked up in a temple belonging to Zeus, or Cybele, depending on the version. It was sacrilege. The gods were offended. So, they turned them both into lions. The ancient Greeks believed that lions couldn't mate with other lions. They thought lions mated with leopards, for some reason. So by turning them into lions, the gods ensured they could be together, but never together. So now they pulled the chariot of the goddess Cybele. Two lions side by side, running forever, but never able to embrace. It's a bittersweet ending. But at least they're still running. The woman who opened the jar and the man who flew too close. So we are back on solid ground. We've watched Atlanta and her husband run off into the sunset as lions, which, all things considered, isn't the worst way to go. At least they have each other. But now we need to talk about the beginning of things. We need to talk about why the world is the way it is. Why do we have sickness? Why do we have taxes? Why do we have mournings? According to the Greeks, it's all because of a jar. You've probably heard it called Pandora's box. But that's actually a translation error. When the story was translated from Greek to Latin by a guy named Erasmus way back in the Renaissance, he mistook the Greek word pithos, which means a large storage jar, usually for wine or grain, for pyxis, which means a box. So for centuries, we've been blaming a box. But it was a jar. A big, heavy ceramic jar. The setup for this disaster starts with Prometheus. Prometheus was a titan who really liked humans. He thought we were cool. He stole fire from the gods and gave it to us so we wouldn't freeze in the dark. Zeus was furious. He punished Prometheus, the whole chained to a rock having his liver eaten by an eagle situation, but he also wanted to punish humanity. He decided the best way to punish men was to give them a partner who was just way too complicated for them to handle. He ordered Hephaestus to build the first woman. Hephaestus crafted her out of clay. She was perfect. Athena dressed her in silver robes. Aphrodite gave her grace and desire. Hermes gave her a shameful mind and a deceitful nature, which seems a bit rude, but Hermes loves chaos. They named her Pandora, which means all-gifted. Zeus sent her down to earth as a gift to Epimetheus. Now, Epimetheus was Prometheus's brother. His name literally means afterthought. Prometheus, whose name means forethought, had explicitly warned his brother, "If Zeus sends you a package, do not sign for it. Return to sender." But Epimetheus saw Pandora. She was stunning. She was holding this intriguing large jar. He forgot all his brother's warnings and said, "Come on in." They lived together for a while. Pandora had been given one instruction by the gods regarding her luggage. Do not open the jar. Now, if you hand someone a mysterious sealed container and tell them not to open it, you are guaranteeing that they will open it. It's reverse psychology 101. Pandora was curious. She was designed to be curious. One day, she couldn't take it anymore. She lifted the heavy lid, just to take a peek. Whoosh! Out flew everything bad. Sickness, old age, jealousy, greed, toil, hunger. They buzzed out like a swarm of angry wasps, scattering to the four corners of the earth. Pandora tried to slam the lid back down, but it was too late. The damage was done. The perfect world of the Golden Age was over. But she did manage to trap one thing inside the rim of the jar before she sealed it. Hope. Elpis. Now, philosophers have argued about this for thousands of years. Was hope preserved in the jar so that humans would always have it? Or was hope considered another evil, the evil of false expectation, and keeping it in the jar was actually a mercy? The Greeks were cynical enough that they probably viewed hope as the thing that just prolongs your suffering. But let's be optimists tonight. Let's say she saved hope for a rainy day. It's a heavy story. It explains why life is hard. It's all just containment failure. Let's drift away from the jar. Let's look up at the sky again. It's a clear blue sky today in our story. Perfect flying weather. He had him there. A promise is a promise. Reluctantly, Helios led him to the chariot. It was made of gold and gems. The horses, Pyrois, Eus, Ethon, and Phlegon, were stomping and snorting fire. Phaeton climbed in. He grabbed the reins. He felt powerful. The doors of the morning opened. The horses took off. Immediately, the horses knew. They felt the light weight on the reins. They realized the master wasn't driving. It was just some kid. They went rogue. They tore off the path. First, they went too high. The earth froze. Great ice sheets covered the north. Then, they swooped down too low. The earth scorched. The rivers boiled. The forests caught fire. The Sahara Desert was created in that moment because the sun chariot dragged too close to the sand. The people of Ethiopia were scorched black. Earth herself, the goddess Gaia, screamed out to Zeus, "Do something! We're burning up!" Zeus looked down from Olympus. He saw the careening chariot. He didn't have a choice. He grabbed a lightning bolt and hurled it. He struck Phaeton right in the chest. The boy fell from the chariot, hair on fire, trailing smoke like a falling star. He landed in the river Eridanus. His sisters, the Heliades, gathered on the riverbank and cried for him. They cried for so long that the gods turned them into poplar trees. Their tears hardened into amber. So, if you ever find a piece of amber with a bug trapped inside, that's a tear from a sister mourning her brother who thought he could drive the sun. It's a lesson in knowing your limits. And maybe don't let your kids drive the sports car until they have a license. Let's descend from the burning sky. Let's cool off. Let's float down to a nice, green pasture. We have time for one more flyer. One more guy who tried to reach the heavens and got swatted down. Bellerophon. Bellerophon was a legitimate hero. He wasn't just a reckless kid. He was the guy who tamed Pegasus, the winged horse. He did it with a golden bridle given to him by Athena. Pegasus was wild, but the bridle calmed him. Together, they were unstoppable. They killed the Chimera, that lion-goat snake monster. They defeated the Amazons. Bellerophon was the greatest hero of his generation. But then, the hubris kicked in. It always does. Bellerophon thought, I'm so great. I've killed monsters. I ride a flying horse. I shouldn't be living down here with the mortals. I belong on Mount Olympus with the gods. So, he mounted Pegasus and steered him upward. To Olympus! He shouted. Zeus watched him coming. He wasn't impressed. He didn't throw a lightning bolt this time. That would be too dramatic. He just sent a gadfly. A little, biting fly. The fly buzzed down and stung Pegasus on the rump. Pegasus bucked. He reared up in the air. Bellerophon, who wasn't wearing a seatbelt, lost his grip. He fell. He fell from the clouds. He didn't die, which might have been a mercy. He landed in a thorn bush. He was blinded and crippled by the fall. Pegasus, meanwhile, kept flying. He made it to Olympus. Zeus adopted him and used him to carry his lightning bolts. But Bellerophon? He spent the rest of his life wandering the alien plane. The plane of wandering. Alone, miserable, and hated by the gods. He went from being the greatest hero to a blind beggar, all because he tried to gate-crash the VIP section of the universe. It's quiet on the plane now. Just the wind blowing through the thorns. Let's leave Bellerophon to his wandering. Let's drift away from the Greek mainland entirely. Let's cross the sea to the boot-shaped peninsula. To Italy. To Rome. Because the Greeks didn't have a monopoly on weird history. The Romans took Greek myths, gave everyone new names, Zeus became Jupiter, Hera became Juno, etc., and then added their own layer of chaotic political history on top. We're going to fast forward a few hundred years. The gods are still watching, but now they are watching a city of marble and brick. A city of emperors and senators and really, really bad family dinners. Let's talk about the Roman Emperor Claudius. If you think Greek families were messy, wait until you meet the Julio Claudians. They make the house of Atrus look like the Brady Bunch. Claudius is interesting because he was the guy nobody expected. He had a limp. He stuttered. He was often ill. His own mother called him a monstrosity of a human being that nature began but never finished. Which is just ouch. Because of this, his family ignored him. They didn't think he was a threat. While his relatives were busy murdering each other to become emperor, Claudius was in the library reading history books and playing dice. Then, the Emperor Caligula, his nephew, got assassinated by the Praetorian Guard. It was a bloodbath. The soldiers were rampaging through the palace, killing everyone. Claudius hid behind a curtain. A soldier saw his feet sticking out. The soldier pulled back the curtain, expecting to find someone to kill. Instead, he saw old Uncle Claudius, shaking with fear. For some reason, maybe as a joke, or maybe because they just needed a puppet, the soldiers declared him emperor right there. All hail Claudius! So the guy who was hiding behind the drapes became the most powerful man in the world. And the irony? He was actually a pretty good emperor. He built aqueducts. He conquered Britain, which Julius Caesar hadn't managed to do. He reformed the legal system. But his personal life? A disaster. A total train wreck. He had terrible taste in women. His third wife was Messalina. Messalina is legendary. She was energetic. She would sneak out of the palace at night to work in a brothel, just for the thrill of it. She supposedly once had a competition with a professional worker to see who could handle more clients in a night. Messalina won. Claudius, oblivious in his library, didn't know any of this. Claudius could change his mind. He was known for being soft-hearted. So then he needed a fourth wife. His advisors gave him a list of eligible noblewomen. But Claudius decided to marry his niece, Agrippina the Younger. This was illegal under Roman law. Incest was frowned upon even then, so he had the Senate pass a special law saying, It's okay if the emperor does it. Agrippina was terrifying. She was the sister of Caligula. She had one goal, to make her son Nero the next emperor. Claudius already had a son, Britannicus. But Agrippina convinced Claudius to adopt Nero and make him the heir. Claudius, who just wanted a quiet life, agreed. Once Nero was named heir, Claudius became redundant. One night, at a banquet, Claudius was served a dish of his favorite mushrooms. He ate them. He started feeling sick. He died a few hours later. Most historians agree Agrippina poisoned the mushrooms. It was the classic Roman exit strategy. So Nero became emperor. And we all know how that went. Spoiler, lots of fire and fiddle playing. But poor Claudius. He just wanted to read his books and eat good food. He survived the purges of Tiberius and the madness of Caligula, only to be taken out by a mushroom and his own niece. It's a reminder that sometimes, the quiet ones survive the longest, but they still have to watch what they eat at family reunions. The city of Rome sleeps now. The aqueducts are trickling water into the fountains. Drip, drop. Drip, drop. The marble is cool to the touch. Let's drift a little further down the timeline. Not too far. Just staying in this vibe of absolute power corrupting absolutely in really weird ways. Let's talk about a horse. But not a flying one this time. A senatorial horse. There is a persistent legend that Caligula, the emperor before Claudius, made his horse, Incitatus, a consul of Rome. Incitatus was a racehorse. Caligula loved him. He loved him more than he loved most people. According to the historian Suetonius, Caligula gave the horse a stable made of marble, a manger made of ivory, purple blankets. Purple was the color of royalty, and a collar of precious stones. He even gave the horse a house with furniture and slaves, so that when the horse invited people over for dinner, they would be comfortable. Imagine getting a dinner invitation from a horse. You have to go. It's the emperor's horse. You sit there, eating grapes, making polite conversation with the stallion. So, Incitatus, how is the track conditions these days? Nay. Fascinating point, sir. Caligula supposedly planned to make him a consul, the highest elected office in Rome. Now, modern historians think this might have been a joke. A very dark, sarcastic joke. Caligula hated the Senate. By threatening to make his horse a consul, he was basically saying, "You guys are so useless that my horse could do your job better." It was political satire. But because he was a terrifying tyrant, nobody laughed. They just nodded and said, "Yes, Caesar. Excellent choice. The horse has very sound fiscal policies." Incitatus never actually became consul. Caligula was assassinated before he could do the paperwork, but he remains the most pampered pet in history. It makes you wonder about your own pets. My cat thinks he's an emperor, but at least he doesn't demand a marble bedroom. Let's leave Rome for a moment. Let's drift east again. Back to the sand. To Egypt. But not the Egypt of the pharaohs. The Egypt of the Ptolemies. The Greek rulers of Egypt. We're going to talk about Cleopatra. Not the famous one. We're talking about the family drama that led up to her. The Ptolemaic dynasty was intense. They took the practice of keeping it in the family to a level that would make the Targaryens uncomfortable. They almost exclusively married their brothers and sisters. Ptolemy VIII Physcon was a piece of work. His nickname, Physcon, means potbelly, or sausage, because he was incredibly obese. He originally ruled with his brother, Ptolemy VI. They hated each other. Ptolemy VI died. Physcon married his brother's widow, who was also their sister, Cleopatra II. Then, Physcon looked at his wife/sister's daughter, his niece/stepdaughter, who was also named Cleopatra, Cleopatra III, and decided he liked her better. So he married her too, without divorcing the mother. So you have a fat king, married to his sister and her daughter, ruling Egypt. It was a nightmare household. The mother, Cleopatra II, eventually rebelled against him. A civil war started. In the capital city of Alexandria, the mob turned against Physcon. He had to flee to Cyprus. But he wanted revenge. He had a son with Cleopatra too, the first wife/sister. The boy, Ptolemy Memphites, was with him. Physcon killed his own son. He cut him up into pieces. He put the pieces in a box. And he sent the box to Cleopatra too as a birthday present. It's gruesome. It's horrific. It makes the Greek myths look like bedtime stories for toddlers. But eventually, Physcon came back. He retook the throne. And in a twist that makes absolutely no sense to modern minds, Cleopatra II and Cleopatra III reconciled with him. They all ruled together again as a happy trio until he died of natural causes. It's baffling. It's the kind of history that makes you just want to stare at the ceiling and say, why? But we aren't here to solve it. We're here to sleep through it. It's all dust now. The palaces are under the sea. The gold is in museums. The anger is gone. Just silence. And sand. The goose who saved Rome and the elephant who crossed the Alps. So, we've left the tangled family trees of Egypt behind. The sand has settled. The box of body parts has been returned to sender, hopefully. We are drifting back across the Mediterranean Sea. The water is choppy, gray, and cold. We are heading back to Rome, but we're dialing the clock back a few centuries. Before the emperors. Before the marble palaces. Back when Rome was just a medium-sized city made of brick and wood, trying very hard to convince everyone else that it was important. We're going to talk about a specific night in 390 BC. A night when the entire fate of Western civilization rested on the alertness of a flock of poultry. The Gauls were attacking. Specifically the Senans, led by a chieftain named Brennus. Now, the Romans were used to fighting their neighbors, the Etruscans, the Sabines, people who fought in nice, organized lines. The Gauls were different. They were tall, they had giant mustaches, they wore pants, which the Romans found deeply unsettling, and they painted themselves for battle. The Roman army met them at the river Allia and was promptly crushed. It wasn't even close. The Romans ran away so fast they forgot to close the city gates behind them. The Gauls walked right into Rome. They sacked the city. They burned the houses. They looted the temples. It was a bad week for real estate values. Stones. He even gave the horse a house with furniture and slaves, so that when the horse invited people over for dinner, they would be comfortable. Imagine getting a dinner invitation from a horse. You have to go. It's the emperor's horse. You sit there, eating grapes, making polite conversation with a stallion. So, Incitatus, how is the track conditions these days? Nay. Fascinating point, sir. Caligula supposedly planned to make him a consul, the highest elected office in Rome. Now, modern historians think this might have been a joke. A very dark, sarcastic joke. Caligula hated the Senate. By threatening to make his horse a consul, he was basically saying, "You guys are so useless that my horse could do your job better." It was political satire. But because he was a terrifying tyrant, nobody laughed. They just nodded and said, "Yes, Caesar. Excellent choice. The horse has very sound fiscal policies." Incitatus never actually became consul. Caligula was assassinated before he could do the paperwork, but he remains the most pampered pet in history. It makes you wonder about your own pets. My cat thinks he's an emperor, but at least he doesn't demand a marble bedroom. Let's leave Rome for a moment. Let's drift east again. Back to the sand. To Egypt. But not the Egypt of the pharaohs. The Egypt of the Ptolemies. The Greek rulers of Egypt. We're going to talk about Cleopatra. Not the famous one. We're talking about the family drama that led up to her. The Ptolemaic dynasty was intense. They took the practice of keeping it in the family to a level that would make the Targaryens uncomfortable. They almost exclusively married their brothers and sisters. Ptolemy VIII Physcon was a piece of work. His nickname, Physcon, means potbelly or sausage, because he was incredibly obese. He originally ruled with his brother, Ptolemy VI. They hated each other. Ptolemy VI died. Physcon married his brother's widow, who was also their sister, Cleopatra II. Then, Physcon looked at his wife/sister's daughter, his niece/stepdaughter, who was also named Cleopatra, Cleopatra III, and decided he liked her better. So he married her too, without divorcing the mother. So you have a fat king, married to his sister and her daughter, ruling Egypt. It was a nightmare household. The mother, Cleopatra II, eventually rebelled against him. A civil war started. In the capital city of Alexandria, the mob turned against Physcon. He had to flee to Cyprus. But he wanted revenge. He had a son with Cleopatra II, the first wife/sister. The boy, Ptolemy Memphites, was with him. Physcon killed his own son. He cut him up into pieces. He put the pieces in a box. And he sent the box to Cleopatra II as a birthday present. It's gruesome. It's horrific. It makes the Greek myths look like bedtime stories for toddlers. But eventually, Physcon came back. He retook the throne. And in a twist that makes absolutely no sense to modern minds, Cleopatra II and Cleopatra III reconciled with him. They all ruled together again as a happy trio until he died of natural causes. It's baffling. It's the kind of history that makes you just want to stare at the ceiling and say, why? But we aren't here to solve it. We're here to sleep through it. It's all dust now. The palaces are under the sea. The gold is in museums. The anger is gone. Just silence. And sand. The goose who saved Rome and the elephant who crossed the Alps. So, we've left the tangled family trees of Egypt behind. The sand has settled. The box of body parts has been returned to sender, hopefully. We are drifting back across the Mediterranean Sea. The water is choppy, gray, and cold. We are heading back to Rome, but we're dialing the clock back a few centuries. Before the emperors. Before the marble palaces. Back when Rome was just a medium-sized city made of brick and wood, trying very hard to convince everyone else that it was important. We're going to talk about a specific night in 390 BC. A night when the entire fate of Western civilization rested on the alertness of a flock of poultry. The Gauls were attacking. Specifically the Senans, led by a chieftain named Brennus. Now, the Romans were used to fighting their neighbors, the Etruscans, the Sabines, people who fought in nice, organized lines. The Gauls were different. They were tall, they had giant mustaches, they wore pants, which the Romans found deeply unsettling, and they painted themselves for battle. The Roman army met them at the river Allia and was promptly crushed. It wasn't even close. The Romans ran away so fast they forgot to close the city gates behind them. The Gauls walked right into Rome. They sacked the city. They burned the houses. They looted the temples. It was a bad week for real estate values. So, he looked at a map. He was in Spain. Italy was that way. In between them were the Pyrenees Mountains, the Rhone River, and the Alps. The Alps are those giant, snowy, jagged peaks that people like to ski on today, but back then were considered a death sentence. Hannibal said, "I'll walk." And he said, "I'm bringing the elephants." He had 37 war elephants. These were North African forest elephants, now extinct, slightly smaller than the African savanna elephants we see today, but still, they are elephants. They are large, gray, and they really do not like snow. It was late autumn. Winter was setting in. Imagine the logistics. You have an army of 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and a herd of tropical animals. You are marching them up narrow, icy goat paths at 8,000 feet of elevation. It was a nightmare. The paths were slippery. Men and horses fell off the cliffs. The local tribes rolled rocks down on their heads. The cold was biting. There's a famous story, probably a myth, but a great one, that a massive rock fall blocked their path. They couldn't move it. So Hannibal ordered his men to pile firewood around the rock and set it on fire. They heated the rock until it was glowing red. Then, they poured their rations of sour wine, vinegar, onto the hot stone. The thermal shock caused the rock to crack and crumble. They cleared the path with pickaxes and moved on. So, technically, Hannibal conquered the Alps with bad wine. They made it over the top. But it was a costly trip. By the time they reached the green plains of Italy on the other side, Hannibal had lost nearly half his army. And the elephants? They struggled. The cold was too much for them. They trudged through the snow, their trunks wrapped in blankets, one assumes, looking miserable. Almost all of them died in that first winter in Italy. The cold, the swampy terrain, the battles. Eventually, only one elephant was left. His name was Surus, the Syrian. He was the biggest one. He had one broken tusk. Hannibal himself got an eye infection from the swamp water and went blind in one eye. So picture this image, the greatest general of the ancient world, wearing a patch over one eye, riding the last surviving elephant through the marshes of Italy, plotting the destruction of Rome. It's cinematic. It's absurd. It's history. Hannibal spent the next 15 years roaming around Italy, winning every battle he fought. He defeated the Romans at Trebia, at Lake Trasimene, and at Cannae. Cannae was the worst defeat Rome ever suffered. Hannibal encircled them and wiped them out. 50,000 Romans died in one afternoon. Hannibal collected the gold rings from the fingers of the fallen Roman senators and knights. He collected so many rings that he poured them onto the floor of the Carthaginian Senate back home. "See," he said, "I'm winning." But he never took Rome itself. He didn't have the siege equipment. He would march up to the walls, look at them, and then march away to burn some more farms. The Romans just waited him out. They refused to surrender. They were stubborn. Remember the geese? Remember. Woe to the conquered. They just kept raising new armies. Eventually, a Roman general named Scipio, who had studied Hannibal's tactics, said, "I'm not going to fight Hannibal in Italy. I'm going to invade Africa." Hannibal had to leave Italy to go home and defend Carthage. He boarded a ship. He looked back at the Italian coastline, fading in the mist. He had been there for 15 years. He had won every battle, but he had lost the war. He met Scipio at the Battle of Zama. Scipio had a trick for the elephants. He ordered his troops to blow loud trumpets and bang drums. The elephants panicked. They turned around and trampled Hannibal's own army. Hannibal lost. Carthage fell. He spent the rest of his life on the run, moving from king to king in the east, offering his services as a consultant. "Need to fight Romans? I have experience." Eventually, the Romans cornered him in a small village in Turkey. He didn't give them the satisfaction of capturing him. He took poison from a ring he wore. His last words were supposedly, "Let us relieve the Romans from the anxiety they have so long experienced, since they think it too long to wait for the death of an old man." Even in death, he was snarky. It's a sad end for the guy who crossed the mountains. But it's quiet now. The snow has covered his tracks in the Alps. The elephants are gone. Let's drift away from the wars. Let's find a quieter place. A library, perhaps. The Library of Alexandria. It was the greatest collection of knowledge in the ancient world. Hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Every play, every history, every map, every scientific theory. It was founded by the Ptolemies, the ancestors of the sausage king we met earlier. They were obsessed with books. They had a law: if a ship docked in Alexandria, the soldiers would search it. Not for contraband, but for books. If they found a scroll, they would seize it, take it to the library, make a copy, give the copy to the owner, and keep the original. It was state-sponsored book theft. They wanted everything. The works of Homer. The star charts of the Babylonians. The medical texts of the Egyptians. And the scholars. Eratosthenes was there. He was the head librarian. He's the guy who calculated the circumference of the earth by measuring shadows in 2 different cities. He got it right to within a few %, using nothing but a stick and his brain. Meanwhile, people today still argue about the shape of the planet on the internet. There was Archimedes, visiting scholar. He invented a water pump that is still used today. He figured out pi. It was a golden age of thinking. The library was a temple to the muses. It had gardens, lecture halls, dining rooms. It was a university. But, as with all nice things in history, it didn't last. People always ask, who burned the Library of Alexandria? And the answer is, everyone. It wasn't just one big fire. It was a slow, tragic series of fires. Julius Caesar accidentally burned part of it when he was fighting in the harbor. He set fire to the enemy's ships, and the fire spread to the docks and the warehouses where the scrolls were stored. Oops, said Caesar. Then, later, Emperor Aurelian damaged it during a civil war. Then, Christian mobs sacked the pagan temples. Then, Muslim forces conquered the city later on. It was a death by 1,000 cuts. Or 1,000 sparks. Imagine all those lost plays. Sophocles wrote 120 plays, we have 7. Aeschylus wrote 90, we have 7. Think of the history books. The memoirs of generals. The recipes. The jokes. All gone. Turned to ash and drifting on the wind over the Mediterranean. It's the ultimate sleep-inducing thought, the silence of lost words. The blank spaces on the shelf where history should be. But let's not be too sad. Knowledge is resilient. We found some of it again. And we're still looking. Let's leave the dusty scrolls. Let's go to a place that is vibrant, colorful, and completely buried. Pompeii. It's 79 AD. It's a sunny day in the Bay of Naples. The rich Romans are vacationing in their seaside villas. The wine is flowing. The fish sauce, garum, is fermenting. Mount Vesuvius is a nice, green mountain in the background. Nobody knows it's a volcano. It hasn't erupted in 1,800 years. They just think it's a good place to grow grapes. Then, around noon, boom! The mountain blows its top. A column of ash and pumice shoots 20 miles into the sky. It looks like a pine tree, according to Pliny the Younger, who was watching from across the bay. His uncle, Pliny the Elder, was a famous admiral and naturalist. He saw the cloud and said, "Fascinating. I'm going to take a closer look." He sailed toward the volcano. "Fortune favors the bold," he shouted. He died on the beach, suffocated by the fumes. Fortune, apparently, favors the bold but punishes the curious. In Pompeii, it was chaos. But also, strangely, it became a moment frozen in time. The ash fell like snow. It buried the city. It preserved everything. When archaeologists dug it up centuries later, they found a Roman city exactly as it was on a Tuesday afternoon. They found bread in the ovens. They found a sign on a doorstep that said Cave Canem. Beware of the dog. They found graffiti on the walls. And this is the best part. The graffiti proves that people haven't changed at all. There's graffiti that says, "Gaius was here." There's graffiti that says, "I have a cold." There's a review of a restaurant. "The service here is terrible." There's a message from a scorned lover. "Restituta, take off your tunic and show us your hairy chest." It's petty. It's human. It's hilarious. There's a message that just says, "Samius to Cornelius, go hang yourself." It's like reading the comments section of a YouTube video, but carved into stone 2,000 years ago. It makes you feel connected, doesn't it? The same petty grievances. The same bad jokes. The same love for dogs. All buried under the gray ash, sleeping forever. The volcano is quiet now. The tourists walk the streets. The ghosts of the Pompeians are probably still arguing about whose turn it is to buy the wine. Let's take one last drift for this section. Let's go to the wildest party in Rome. The Colosseum. But not the gladiator fights. Those are too loud. Too bloody. Let's talk about the Naumachia. The sea battles. The Emperor Titus wanted to impress everyone for the opening of the Colosseum. So he flooded the arena. He literally diverted the aqueducts and filled the center of the amphitheater with water. Then, he put real ships in there. Warships. Biremes and triremes. They had 3,000 men rowing and fighting. In a swimming pool. Imagine the engineering. You have to waterproof the floor. You have to get the water in. You have to get the water out. And you have to do it all before the afternoon show. The sheer excess of it. "I'm bored of land fights," the emperor said. "Bring me the ocean." It was a logistical nightmare, of course. The water leaked into the basement where they kept the lions. The wood got soggy. But for a few glorious hours, Rome had a navy in its backyard. After a while, they stopped doing it. It was too expensive, and the water damaged the foundations. They went back to lions and bears. But just picture it. A sunny afternoon. The crowd cheering. And a battleship doing a three-point turn in the middle of a stadium. The Romans really knew how to waste money in style. "We're going to leave the water now. The drain is pulled. The arena is dry. The crowd has gone home. The sun is setting over the empire. The shadows are long. The emperor who fought the ocean and the medieval pope trial. We are back on the beach. But this isn't the warm, sandy beach of Pompeii, and it's not the rocky coast of Naxos. We are on the northern coast of Gaul, looking out across the English Channel toward Britain. It's grey, it's windy, and there is a Roman legion standing there looking very confused. We are observing the Emperor Caligula again. We already mentioned his horse, Incitatus, who lived better than most senators. But Caligula's eccentricity didn't stop at equestrian interior design. He also declared war on the ocean. Caligula had marched his army all the way north, intending to invade Britain. But when he got to the coast, he changed his mind. Maybe the water looked too cold. Maybe he forgot his boats. Or maybe, as the historians suggest, he just decided that the real enemy wasn't the Britons, but Neptune, the god of the sea. He lined up his soldiers in battle formation on the beach. The artillery engines, the ballistae and catapults, were aimed at the surf. "Soldiers of Rome!" Caligula shouted. "Attack!" The soldiers looked at each other. They looked at the waves. They looked back at the emperor. Then, because disobeying Caligula usually meant a very painful death, they shrugged and started stabbing the water. Thousands of grown men, highly trained killing machines, poking the Atlantic Ocean with their gladii. The catapults fired rocks into the surf. Splash. "Take that, Neptune." After a few minutes of this salty combat, Caligula declared victory. "We have conquered the sea," he announced. But a victory needs plunder. You can't have a triumph back in Rome without loot. "Gather the spoils of war," Caligula ordered. The soldiers, probably sighing internally, put away their swords and started picking up seashells. They filled their helmets with clam shells and conch shells. They filled chests with them. Caligula marched back to Rome in a grand triumph, displaying the seashells as if they were gold and jewels captured from a foreign king. He built a lighthouse to commemorate the victory. It's the ultimate example of looking busy at work. Let's drift forward a bit. The seashells have been crushed into sand. The lighthouse has crumbled. Let's talk about Nero. We touched on him briefly, but he deserves a moment. Nero didn't want to be a soldier. He wanted to be an artist. He wanted to be a star. He went on a tour of Greece. Not a diplomatic tour. A performing arts tour. He entered the Olympic Games. But not for running or wrestling. He entered the chariot race. He drove a 10-horse chariot. It was unwieldy and dangerous. In the middle of the race, Nero fell out. He hit the dust. The handlers had to run out, pick him up, dust him off, and put him back in the chariot. He couldn't finish the race. But the judges declared him the winner anyway. "Nero wins!" they shouted. "Because, well, he's the emperor, and we like living." Nero also entered the singing competitions and the acting competitions. He won every single one. He came back to Rome with 1,808 first-place laurel wreaths. He hung them all over his palace. He took his art very seriously. When he performed in the theater in Rome, he would have the doors locked. No one was allowed to leave. The performances lasted for hours. People were so desperate to escape Nero's singing that some jumped off the back walls, and women reportedly gave birth in the aisles just to have an excuse to be carried out. It puts your awkward office talent show into perspective. Let's slide past the fire and the fiddling. Let's move to the year 69 AD. the year of the 4 emperors. It was a chaotic year. Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and Vespasian. It was like musical chairs, but with swords. Let's focus on Vitellius. He was emperor for about 8 months. And he spent almost every waking minute of those 8 months eating. Vitellius was a glutton on a scale that is hard to comprehend. He didn't just like food, he worshipped it. He invented a dish called the Shield of Minerva. It was a massive platter containing pike livers, pheasant brains, peacock brains, flamingo tongues, and lamprey milt. He sent the Roman navy, the same navy that once fought Carthage, out to catch rare ingredients for his lunch. He would eat 3 or 4 massive banquets a day. He bankrupted the treasury just buying exotic birds to snack on. While the armies of his rival, Vespasian, were marching toward Rome to kill him, Vitellius was busy planning a dinner party. When the enemy soldiers finally stormed the palace, they found Vitellius hiding in a doorkeeper's lodge, trying to shove a bed against the door. He was dragged out and killed. His last words were, "Yet I was once your emperor." It's a sad, greasy end to a short reign. Let's move forward again. To the very end of the bizarre Roman timeline. To Elagabalus. Elagabalus was a teenager. He was 14 when he became emperor. He was a high priest of the Syrian sun god Elgabal. He brought his god with him to Rome in the form of a giant black rock, a meteorite. He made the senators worship the rock. But mostly, Elagabalus was a prankster. A really annoying one. He would invite guests to dinner and serve them food made of glass or wax. It looked realistic, but you couldn't eat it. He would sit there laughing while they tried to chew wax apples. He had cushions that would deflate when you sat on them, the ancient equivalent of the whoopee cushion. He would release tame lions and leopards into the bedrooms of his guests while they were sleeping. The animals were harmless, they were defanged and declawed, but imagine waking up in a dark room with a lion breathing on your face. The guests would panic, and Elagabalus would watch from a peephole, giggling. There is a famous story that he hosted a festival where he released tons of flower petals from a false ceiling. Violets and roses poured down on the guests. It was supposed to be beautiful. But he miscalculated the volume. He dropped so many petals that some of the guests were actually smothered and suffocated under the floral avalanche. Death by flowers. It's the most aesthetic way to go, I suppose. Eventually, his own grandmother decided he was too much of a liability, and arranged for him to be assassinated in a latrine. He was 18. Rome is exhausting. Too much marble. Too much madness. Let's leave the city. Let's fly north. Over the Alps. Over the forests. Let's go to the Middle Ages. The timeline has shifted. The togas are gone. Now it's chainmail and robes. The Roman Empire has fallen, and the Church is the new power player. And if you thought emperors were petty, wait until you meet the popes of the 9th century. We are going to talk about the Cadaver Synod. The trial of the corpse. It is the year 897 AD. Rome is a mess. Different factions are fighting for control of the papacy. Pope Stephen VI is currently in charge. He hates his predecessor, Pope Formosus. The problem is, Pope Formosus is dead. He's been dead for 7 months. Usually, when your enemy dies, you claim victory and move on. But Stephen VI was not a move-on kind of guy. He wanted to put Formosus on trial for crimes against church law. So, he ordered the body to be dug up. They went to the crypt. They pulled Formosus out. He had been rotting for 7 months. It was not pleasant. They dressed the corpse in the full papal vestments. The robes, the hat, everything. They propped him up on a throne in the courtroom. Because a corpse can't speak for itself, they appointed a young deacon to be his defense attorney. Imagine being that deacon. You have to stand next to a decomposing pope and whisper legal advice into his ear. Pope Stephen VI screamed at the corpse. "Why did you usurp the universal see?" The corpse, predictably, remained silent. The deacon probably stammered a few defenses, but it was a kangaroo court. Formosus was found guilty. They stripped the papal robes off the body. They cut off the 3 fingers of his right hand, The fingers used to give blessings. They threw the body into a common grave. Later, they dug it up again and threw it into the Tiber River. But here's the twist. A monk found the body washed up on the riverbank. Rumors started spreading that the body was performing miracles. The people of Rome turned against Stephen VI. They thought, okay, digging up a dead guy was a step too far. A mob arrested Pope Stephen VI, threw him in prison, and strangled him. Formosus's body was recovered, redressed, again, and reburied in St. Peter's Basilica with full honors. So, in the end, the dead guy won. It's a grim story, but it happened. It's written in the history books. A courtroom drama with a silent protagonist. Let's wash the river mud off our hands. Let's go somewhere cleaner. Somewhere colder. Let's go to Scandinavia. To the Vikings. Now, Vikings have a reputation for being violent raiders. And they were. But they were also weirdly legalistic. They loved law courts called things. They loved poetry. And they loved cats. Did you know the goddess Freya rode a chariot pulled by 2 giant blue cats? Not lions. House cats. Just very big ones. But let's talk about a specific Viking king. Sigurd the Mighty, Earl of Orkney. Sigurd was a conqueror. He wanted to take over northern Scotland. He challenged a local Scottish chieftain, Maelbrigg the Bucktooth, to a battle. They agreed to meet with 40 men each. A fair fight. Sigurd, being a cheater, a common theme tonight, showed up with 80 men. He put 2 men on each horse so it looked like 40 horses. They slaughtered the Scots. Sigurd won. He cut off Maelbrigg's head as a trophy. He tied the head to his saddle and rode off in triumph. But Maelbrigg had a nickname for a reason. He was the Buck-toothed. He had a massive, protruding tooth. As Sigurd was riding, bouncing up and down in the saddle, the severed head swung back and forth. The bucktooth scratched Sigurd's leg. It was just a scratch. But this was the Middle Ages. We didn't have antibiotics. The scratch got infected. It turned gangrenous. Sigurd the Mighty died a few days later, killed by the head of the man he had already decapitated. It is the only known case in history of a post-mortem revenge kill via dentistry. It teaches us 2 things: don't cheat at numbers, and good dental hygiene is important, even for enemies. Let's drift south again. Away from the cold winds of Scotland. Let's go to France. To the late medieval period. Let's talk about Charles VI of France. Charles the Beloved. And later, Charles the Mad. Charles started out fine. He was a popular king. But one day, he was riding through the forest on a hot August day. A leopard jumped out of the bushes, it's always someone jumping out of bushes, and shouted, "Ride no further, noble king! You are betrayed!" Charles was startled. He kept riding, but he was shaken. Later, a page dropped a lance. The loud clang of metal on metal snapped Charles's mind. He drew his sword and attacked his own men, killing several knights before they could restrain him. He fell into a coma. When he woke up, he was different. He forgot his name. He forgot he was king. He ran through the palace corridors howling like a wolf. But his most famous delusion was the glass delusion. King Charles VI became convinced that he was made of glass. He was terrified that if he bumped into anything, he would shatter into a million pieces. He refused to let anyone touch him. He had iron rods sewn into his clothes to protect his brittle body. He would sit perfectly still for hours, afraid to move a muscle in case he cracked. Imagine the stress. Believing you are a walking vase in a world made of stone floors and heavy furniture. His court tried to entertain him. They held a masquerade ball. The Bal d'Ardents, the ball of the burning men. The king and 5 noblemen dressed up as wild men. They covered themselves in pitch, tar, and flax to look like hairy beasts. They were chained together. It was a fun party trick. Until the king's brother, the Duke of Orleans, arrived drunk. He wanted to see who was under the masks. He held the torch too close. The pitch caught fire. The wild men went up in flames. Because they were chained together, they couldn't escape. 4 of them burned to death in front of the court. The king was saved only because his aunt, the Duchess of Berry, recognized him and threw her heavy skirt over him to smother the flames. So, the king who thought he was made of glass almost melted. It's tragic, but also surreal. A court dancing in costumes of tar, a king wrapped in iron rods, a world balancing on the edge of madness. Charles lived for many more years, alternating between sanity and glass. England took advantage of the chaos. Henry V and Agincourt happened during this time, and France almost fell apart. All because of a fragile mind. Let's step away from the fire. The ballroom is empty. The smoke has cleared. Let's go to a quiet monastery. Monks are good at sleeping. They wake up early, they pray, they transcribe books. But even monks get bored. And when monks get bored, they doodle. If you look at the margins of medieval manuscripts, prayer books, Bibles, legal texts, you find the weirdest things. Killer rabbits. There are hundreds of drawings in the margins of medieval books depicting rabbits hunting humans. Rabbits with swords. Rabbits riding snails into battle. Rabbits hanging hunters. Why? Historians aren't entirely sure. Maybe it was an inside joke. The world turned upside down. The meek prey becoming the predator. Or maybe the monks just really hated rabbits. There are also drawings of knights fighting snails. Just a fully armored knight jousting a garden snail. The snail usually looks like it's winning. It's a glimpse into the minds of people who had to sit in silence for 12 hours a day copying text. Their minds wandered. They created a fantasy world where snails were dragons and bunnies were assassins. It's comforting to know that even in the most serious, holy environments, people were still doodling nonsense in the margins. We are nearing the end of our journey through the chaos. The timeline is slowing down. Let's drift to one final story for this section. A story about a chair. A very expensive chair. We are in the Holy Roman Empire, which, as the joke goes, was neither holy, nor Roman, nor an empire. We are looking at the coronation of the emperor. But we are looking at the relic they used. The spear of destiny? No. The crown of thorns? No. The unicorn horn. For centuries, European royals paid massive sums of money for unicorn horns. They believed the horn could neutralize poison. They made cups out of it. They ground it into powder. A single horn was worth a castle. But unicorns, as we know, don't exist. So what were they buying? Narwhal tusks. Vikings, our friends from earlier, were sailing to the Arctic, hunting narwhals, cutting off the long, spiral tooth, and selling them to gullible European kings as unicorn horns. Queen Elizabeth I of England had a unicorn horn, valued at £10,000, the price of a castle. The kings of Denmark had an entire throne chair made of unicorn horns. It's still there in Copenhagen. You can see it. It's made of narwhal teeth. Just imagine the Vikings snickering as they sold these fish teeth to the most powerful people on earth. Yes, yes, very magical horse. Very rare. Hard to catch. It's the greatest con in history. And it resulted in a very nice chair. The castle is quiet now. The throne room is empty. The narwhal ghosts are swimming in the Arctic Sea, wondering where their teeth went. We have drifted a long way tonight. From the walls of Troy to the fires of Rome, from the cliffs of Scotland to the monasteries of France. The history books are full of noise. Battles, speeches, fires. But if you close the book, the noise stops. It's just ink on paper. The figures are frozen. Midas in his turban. Nero with his lyre. Caligula with his seashell. The geese on the hill. They are all sleeping now, just like you should be. Let's take one last look at the timeline. It stretches out behind us, a long, winding road of mistakes and miracles. The dancing plague and the army that fought itself. We have left the frozen north and the throne of narwhal teeth. We are drifting forward in time, but sticking to the theme of mass confusion. Let's go to Strasbourg. It is July of 1518. It is hot. The air is thick and humid. The streets are narrow and smell of unwashed medieval city. A woman named Frau Trophia steps out of her house. She looks around. And then, for reasons known only to her and perhaps a very specific type of brain fungus, she starts to dance. She isn't doing a waltz. She isn't doing a folk dance. She is just moving. Fervently. She dances down the street. There is no music. Just the sound of her feet slapping on the cobbles and her heavy breathing. Her husband comes out. "Honey, come back inside. You're making a scene." She ignores him. She keeps dancing. She dances for hours. Then days. She dances until her feet are bleeding. She collapses from exhaustion, sleeps for a bit, wakes up, and starts dancing again. Now, if this was just one person, it would be a medical curiosity. But then her neighbor joined in. Then another. Within a week, 30 people were dancing. Within a month, there were 400 people. It was the dancing plague. Choreomania. Imagine a flash mob, but nobody is smiling, everyone is terrified, and they can't stop. They were dancing themselves to death. Strokes, heart attacks, heat stroke. People were dropping like flies, but their legs kept twitching. The city council didn't know what to do. They consulted the doctors. The doctors, using the cutting-edge science of the 16th century, said, "It's overheating blood. The brain is too hot." So, the council made a decision. A decision that ranks among the worst public health policies in history. They decided that the only way to cure the dancing was to encourage it. They need to dance it out of their systems, the council said. So they hired musicians. They hired drummers and pipers. They cleared a space in the market square. They even hired professional strongmen to hold the dancers up so they wouldn't fall over. "Dance!" the council shouted. "Get it all out!" Predictably, giving a beat to a compulsive dancing mania did not stop it. It made it worse. The music just attracted more people. "Oh, is there a party? Join. Die." It lasted for weeks until they finally decided to cart everyone off to a shrine in the mountains to pray to Saint Vitus. Eventually, the dancing stopped. Historians think it might have been ergot poisoning, mold on the rye bread that acts like a hallucinogen, or just mass stress-induced hysteria. But just picture that summer. The heat. The sweat. The frantic, silent faces. And the band playing on, totally confused about why nobody was clapping. Let's leave the dancers to catch their breath. Let's drift a few centuries forward. To 1788. We are going to visit the Austrian Empire. We are going to witness the Battle of Karansebes. This is a unique battle in military history because the enemy didn't show up. And the army still lost. Badly. The Austrian army, about 100,000 strong, was marching to fight the Ottoman Turks. They were led by Emperor Joseph II. It was a multinational army, Austrians, Serbs, Croats, Italians. Many of them didn't speak the same language. This is important. On the night of September 21st, the Hussars, cavalry, crossed the river to scout for Turks. They didn't find any Turks. But they did find a group of Romani traders selling schnapps. The Hussars thought, "Excellent. War is hard. Let's get drunk." They bought all the schnapps. Then, the infantry crossed the river. They saw the Hussars drinking. The infantrymen were thirsty too. "Hey," they said. "Share the schnapps." The Hussars refused. They set up empty barrels as a barricade to protect their booze. They were possessive. A shouting match started. Then a fist fight. Then, one soldier got angry and fired a shot. In the chaos, someone, maybe trying to scare the Hussars, or maybe just confused, shouted, "Turks! The Turks are coming!" The Hussars panicked. They jumped on their horses and fled back toward the main camp. The infantry, seeing the cavalry running at them in the dark, thought it was a Turkish charge. They started shooting at the Hussars. The Hussars shouted, "Halt! Halt! Stop! Stop!" But the soldiers who didn't speak German heard, "Allah! Allah!" Panic spread instantly. The entire army woke up in the dark, hearing shooting and screaming. They assumed the camp was under full attack. Corps commanders ordered artillery fire on their own troops. Soldiers bayoneted shadows. The Emperor, Joseph II, tried to stop it. He rode his horse into the confusion. But the panic was too strong. He was knocked off his horse and fell into a creek. He had to crawl out of the mud in the dark, alone, while his army destroyed itself behind him. By the morning, the battle was over. Thousands of men were dead or wounded. The army scattered. 2 days later, the real Ottoman army arrived. They found the plain covered in dead Austrian soldiers, but no enemy. The Grand Vizier must have looked around, scratched his head, and said, "Well, that was easy." He took the city of Karansebes without a fight. It's the ultimate cautionary tale about the dangers of alcohol and language barriers in the workplace. Let's float away from the battlefield. The schnapps barrels are empty. The emperor is drying his clothes. Let's go to Italy. To the 14th century. To a war that started over a bucket. Actually, historians will tell you the war was about politics. Guelphs versus Ghibellines, Pope versus Emperor. But the bucket is the symbol. This is the War of the Bucket, between the city-states of Bologna and Medina. It was 1325. Tensions were high. Bologna was rich, Medina was aggressive. One night, a group of Modenese soldiers sneaked into Bologna. They went to the main city well, right in the center of town. They stole the bucket. It was just a wooden bucket filled with loot, but mostly it was the principle of the thing. "We have your water receptacle." Bologna was furious. They demanded the bucket back. Medina refused. So Bologna declared war. They raised an army of 30,000 foot soldiers and 2,000 cavaliers. They marched on Medina. Medina only had 5,000 soldiers. But they were scrappy. They met at the Battle of Zappolino. It was one of the largest battles in medieval Italy. Thousands died. It was bloody and brutal. And Medina won. The underdog took the day. To celebrate, the Modenese soldiers marched all the way to the gates of Bologna, taunted them, and then went home. And they kept the bucket. They put the bucket in the bell tower of the cathedral in Medina. They treated it like a holy relic. If you go to Medina today, you can still see it. Well, you can see a replica in the tower. The real bucket is in the museum. It's an old, rotting oak bucket held together with rusty iron hoops. 2,000 people died for it. It sits there in its glass case, a silent testament to the fact that human beings will fight over absolutely anything if they are bored and angry enough. Let's leave the bucket. It's safe. Nobody is going to steal it tonight. Let's drift to 17th century Prague. Prague is a beautiful city. Spires, bridges, castles. It is also the world capital of defenestration. Defenestration is a fancy word that means throwing someone out of a window. The fact that there is a specific word for it tells you something about human history. The most famous one happened in 1618. Tensions were rising between the Protestant nobles and the Catholic regents who were ruling for the emperor. The Protestants marched up to Prague Castle. They were angry about rights and churches. They cornered 4 Catholic regents in a council room on the 3rd floor. They argued. It got heated. Finally, the Protestant leader said, "You are enemies of the kingdom." They grabbed 2 of the regents and their secretary. They dragged them to the window. The window was 70 feet, 21 meters, above the ground. That is a significant drop. It's about the height of a 5-story building. They threw them out. The men fell. They tumbled through the air, screaming. And they landed, softly. They survived. All 3 of them. They got up, dusted themselves off, and ran away. Now, this was a miracle. But both sides had a different explanation. The Catholics said, "The Virgin Mary and angels swooped down and gently caught them, lowering them to the ground." The Protestants said, "No, they fell into a giant pile of horse manure that had accumulated in the dry moat." Angels or manure. History is usually a matter of perspective. But the result was the same. The survival of these men was seen as a sign. The event kicked off the 30 Years' War, which devastated Europe. It was one of the longest, most destructive conflicts in history. And it started because some guys got thrown out of a window and didn't die. It's quiet in the castle courtyard now. The window is closed. The moat is clean. Let's drift way forward. To the 20th century. To a different continent. Australia. The land of dangerous animals. Spiders, snakes, sharks. But in 1932, the enemy was something else. The enemy was the emu. This is the Great Emu War. And I promise you, I am not making this up. After World War I, the Australian government gave land to veterans to farm wheat in Western Australia. It was hard work. But by 1932, they had a good crop. Then came the migration. 20,000 emus arrived. Emus are large, flightless birds. They are about 6 feet tall. They run fast. And they were hungry. They broke the fences. They ate the wheat. They drank the water. They were destroying the livelihood of the farmers. The farmers were ex-soldiers. They didn't call animal control. They called the Minister of Defense. They said, "Send us machine guns." The minister, Sir George Pearce, agreed. He sent Major G.P.W. Meredith of the Royal Australian Artillery, along with 2 soldiers and 2 Lewis guns, machine guns, and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. The press called it a war. They expected a massacre. Man versus bird. Technology versus beaks. Major Meredith arrived. He saw a flock of emus. He ordered his men to open fire. But emus are smart. They didn't stand still. They scattered. They ran at 30 miles per hour in every direction. The machine guns couldn't traverse fast enough. The emus had a strategy. One tall bird would stand watch while the others ate. At the first sign of trouble, the watchbird would signal, and they would vanish into the bush. Major Meredith was frustrated. He wrote in his report, "The emus have command of the mobile units." He admired them. He said if they were humans, they could face any army in the world. They tried mounting the machine guns on a truck to chase the birds. But the terrain was so rough the gunner couldn't aim. Also, an emu got caught in the steering wheel and crashed the truck. After a week, the army had used 2,500 rounds of ammunition. Confirmed emu casualties, maybe 50. It was a humiliation. The press was laughing. Parliament questioned the expense. Major Meredith withdrew. The emus won. They eventually solved the problem by building better fences and offering a bounty. But for that one glorious month in 1932, the Australian army was defeated by a flock of oversized chickens. It's a reminder that nature always finds a way to humble us. You can have the best technology in the world, but if you can't hit a zigzagging bird, you lose. Let's fly away from the wheat fields. Let's go back to the ocean. We're going to talk about a ship. The Vasa. The year is 1628. Sweden is a great power. King Gustavus Adolphus wants a flagship. The biggest, baddest ship in the Baltic. He orders the Vasa. It's a monster. 69 meters long. 64 bronze cannons. Hundreds of sculptures painted in bright colors, gold, red, blue. It was a floating palace of intimidation. But the king kept changing the design. "Add more cannons," he said. "Add another gun deck." The shipwrights were nervous. "Sire," they said, "if we add more weight to the top, it will be unstable. It will be top-heavy." "Nonsense," said the king. "I want more guns." They built it. They launched it in Stockholm harbor. It was a beautiful day. Thousands of people watched. The gun ports were open to fire a salute. A light breeze blew. Just a gentle puff of wind. The Vasa heeled over. It leaned to the left. The water rushed into the open lower gun ports. The ship sank. It didn't sink in a storm. It didn't sink in a battle. It sank 1,300 meters from the dock, on its maiden voyage, because a mild breeze pushed it over. It sat on the bottom of Stockholm harbor for 333 years. Because the Baltic Sea is cold and has low salinity, shipworms didn't eat the wood. They raised it in 1961. It's in a museum now. You can go see it. It is 98% original. It is magnificent. And it is a giant wooden monument to scope creep and not listening to your engineers. It's sleeping in the museum now. The cannons are silent. The king is long dead. The water is still. Let's drift to one final story for this part. A story about a man who just wanted to be alone. Simeon Stylites. Simeon was a monk in Syria in the 5th century. He found that living in a monastery wasn't ascetic enough. Too many people. Too much chatter. He wanted to get closer to God. So he found a pillar. A stone column in some ruins. He climbed up to the top. There was a small platform, about a meter square. He sat there. He stayed there for 37 years. He didn't come down. Not for rain. Not for snow. Not for the scorching sun. His disciples would climb a ladder to bring him food and take away waste. People started coming to see him. The pole sitter. He became a tourist attraction. People would shout questions up to him. Simeon! Pray for my goat! Simeon! My back hurts! He spent his whole life trying to escape people, and by sitting on a pole, he became the most famous person in the region. He had to install a railing so he wouldn't fall off in his sleep. Imagine the nights. Just sitting on a pillar, under the stars, for decades. Your legs cramping. The wind howling. Other people copied him. The Stylites. It became a trend. There were guys on pillars all over the desert. It was the social media challenge of the 5th century. But eventually, Simeon died up there. They had to climb up and fetch him. It's a strange dedication. But there is something peaceful about it. Just finding your spot, even if it's a tiny platform 50 feet in the air, and staying there. Not moving. Just watching the world go by below you. We are all just sitting on our own little pillars, aren't we? The wind blows across the desert. The sand covers the ruins. The pillars fall down. It's time to drift to the end. To close the book. The unsinkable cat and the end of the script. We are drifting into the final stretch of our journey. The waters are choppy again. We are in the Atlantic Ocean. It is 1941. The world is at war. Steel leviathans are hunting each other in the dark. But we aren't interested in the admirals or the torpedoes. We are interested in a cat. A black and white tuxedo cat. We don't know his original German name. Let's call him Oscar, because that's what the British eventually called him. Oscar was a ship's cat. His job was simple: catch rats, look cute, and provide morale support to nervous sailors. He was stationed on the Bismarck, the pride of the German Navy. A massive, terrifying battleship. In May 1941, the British Royal Navy hunted the Bismarck down. It was a ferocious battle. The Bismarck was sunk. Over 2,000 sailors went into the water. Most of them didn't make it. But hours later, the British destroyer HMS Cossack was combing the wreckage, looking for survivors. They saw something floating on a piece of timber. It was the cat. He was wet. He was shivering. He was probably very annoyed. But he was alive. The British sailors fished him out. They dried him off. They decided to keep him. They named him Oscar. So, Oscar became a British sailor. He served on the HMS Cossack for a few months. He caught British rats instead of German ones. He was doing his part for the war effort. Then, in October, the HMS Cossack was escorting a convoy near Gibraltar. A German U-boat fired a torpedo. It hit the Cossack. The ship was severely damaged and began to sink. The crew had to abandon ship. They scrambled onto a destroyer, the HMS Legion. And who did they bring with them? Oscar. He survived his second sinking. He was now 242. The sailors brought him to Gibraltar. By now, he was getting a reputation. They renamed him Unsinkable Sam. Now you would think that maybe Sam should retire. Maybe find a nice villa on the coast and chase lizards. But the Navy needed him. He was transferred to the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal. This was a big ship. Unsinkable, surely. 3 weeks later. November 1941. Another U-boat. Another torpedo. The Ark Royal took a heavy hit. It listed to the side. It took a long time to sink, so almost everyone got off safely. A launch boat went back to check for stragglers. They found Sam. He was clinging to a floating plank of wood. The report described him as angry but quite unharmed. That was it. The Royal Navy decided that Sam was bad luck. Or maybe they just decided he had used up all his 9 lives and was starting to borrow from other cats. No more ships for Sam, the Admiral said. Sam was retired to the Governor of Gibraltar's offices. Later, he was moved to the Home for Sailors in Belfast. He lived there for another 14 years. He died peacefully on land, in a warm bed, far away from torpedoes and cold water. It's a story of survival. It tells us that no matter how chaotic the world gets, no matter how many giant metal ships sink beneath the waves, there is always a cat floating on a plank, looking for a dry towel. Let's leave Sam to his nap. Let's drift back to the land. We have time for one last military story. But this is the opposite of a war story. It is the most peaceful war story ever told. We are going to the tiny principality of Liechtenstein. It's a little country sandwiched between Switzerland and Austria. It has mountains, castles, and very relaxed people. The year is 1866. The Austro-Prussian War breaks out. Everyone is fighting. Liechtenstein, being a member of the German Confederation, is obligated to send an army. They didn't really want to fight. But they followed the rules. They gathered their army. It consisted of 80 men. They marched out to defend the Brenner Pass against the Italians. They arrived at the pass. They set up camp. They sat there. The enemy never showed up. So, the Liechtenstein army spent a few weeks camping in the mountains. They drank wine, they looked at the scenery, they probably played cards. It was a lovely vacation. When the war ended, they marched back home to Vaduz, the capital. The people came out to cheer them. The commander did a head count. He had left with 80 men. He returned with 81 men. They hadn't suffered any casualties. In fact, they had gained a guy. An Austrian liaison officer, or maybe an Italian defector, the stories vary, had made friends with them during the camping trip. He liked them so much he decided to just join the army and go back to Liechtenstein with them. It is the only recorded instance in military history of an army suffering negative casualties. It's the perfect antidote to all the chaos we've talked about tonight. The Trojan War, the fall of Rome, the burning libraries. And then, at the end of it all, 80 guys going for a hike and coming back with a new friend. It makes you think that maybe, just maybe, humans aren't entirely hopeless. We are at the end of the line now. The timeline has run out. The fire is just embers. The candle has burned down to the wax. The scroll is rolled up. We have seen a lot tonight. We saw Helen leaving Sparta. We saw Hades kidnapping Persephone. We saw emperors fighting the ocean and popes fighting corpses. We saw dancing plagues and Emu wars. It all seems so loud when you're in the middle of it. But looking back, it's just a drift. A slow, steady current of time. History is just a collection of people trying to figure things out. Usually getting it wrong, but sometimes, accidentally, getting it right. And now, they are all sleeping. Oscar the cat is sleeping in Belfast. The geese of Rome are sleeping on the Capitoline Hill. And Endymion is sleeping in his cave, watched by the moon. The 81 soldiers of Liechtenstein are sleeping in their barracks. Everything is quiet. The noise of the centuries has faded away. There is nothing left to worry about. The wars are over. The treaties are signed. The statues are carved. You don't need to conquer a city tonight. You don't need to build